Chilling tales for dark nights.
Want to make sure you never miss a Chilling Tales for Dark Nights video again? Be sure to subscribe and hit that bell to turn on notifications.
The amber brown of the liquor disguised the poison it held, and I watched with a smile on my lips as he drank it. There was no pity in my heart for him. He was a jackal in the jungle of life, and I was one of the carnivores. It is the lot of jackals of life to be devoured by the carnivore. Suddenly, the contented look in his face froze into a startled stillness. I knew he was feeling the first savage twinge of the agony that was to come. He turned his head and looked at me, and I saw suddenly that he knew what I had done. "You murderer!" he cursed me. And then his body arched in the middle and his voice choked off deep in his throat. For a short minute, he sat tense, his body stiffened by the agony that rode it, unable to move a muscle. I watched the torment in his eyes build up to a crescendo of pain, until the suffering became so great that it filmed his eyes, and I knew that, though he still stared directly at me, he no longer saw me. Then, as suddenly as the spasm had come, the starch went out of his body, and his back slid slowly down the chair edge. He landed heavily, with his head resting limply against the seat of the chair, his right leg doubled up in kind of a jerk. Before he was still, I knew the time had come. "Where are you?" I asked. This moment had cost me $60,000. 3 weeks ago, the best doctors in the state had given me a month to live. And with $7 million in the bank, I couldn't buy a minute more. I accepted the doctor's decision philosophically, like the gambler that I am. But I had a plan. One which necessity had never forced me to use until now. Several years before, I had read an article about the medicine men of a certain tribe of aborigines living in the jungles at the source of the Amazon River. They had discovered a process in which the juice of a certain bush, known only to them, could be used to poison a man. Anyone subjected to this poison died, but for a few minutes after the life left his body, the medicine men could still converse with him. The subject, though ostensibly, and actually dead, answered the medicine men's every question. This was their primitive, though reportedly effective method of catching glimpses of what lay in the world of death. I had conceived my idea at the time I read the article, but I had never had the need to use it until the doctors gave me a month to live. Then I spent my $60,000, and 3 weeks later I held in my hands a small bottle of the witch doctor's fluid. The next step was to secure my victim, my collaborator, I preferred to call him. The man I chose was a nobody, a homeless, friendless non-entity picked up off the street. He had once been an educated man, but now he was only a bum, and when he died, he'd never be missed. A perfect man for my experiment. I'm a rich man because I have a system. The system is simple. I never make a move until I know exactly where that move will lead me. My field of operations is the stock market. I spend money unstintingly to secure the information I need before I take each step. I hire the best investigators, bribe employees and persons in positions to give me the information I want, and only when I am as certain as humanly possible that I cannot be wrong do I move. And the system never fails. $7 million in the bank is proof of that. Now, knowing that I could not live, I intended to make the system work for me one last time before I died. I'm a firm believer in the adage that any situation can be whipped, given prior knowledge of its coming, and of course its attendant circumstances. For a moment, he did not answer, and I began to fear that my experiment had failed. "Where are you?" I repeated louder and sharper this time. The small muscles about his eyes puckered with a normal tension, while the rest of his face held its death frost. Slowly, unnaturally, as though energized by some hyper-rational power, his lips and tongue moved. The words he spoke were clear. "I am in a tunnel," he said. "It is lighted dimly, but there is nothing for me to see." Blue veins showed through the flesh of his cheeks like watermarks on translucent paper. He paused, and I urged, "Go on." "I am alone," he said. "The realities I knew no longer exist, and I am damp and cold. All about me is a sense of gloom and dejection. It's an apprehension, an emanation, so deep and real as to be almost a tangible thing. The walls to either side of me seem to be formed not of substance, but rather of the soundless cries of melancholy of spirits I cannot see. I'm waiting in the gloom for something which will come to me. That need to wait is an innate part of my being, and I have no thought of questioning it." His voice died again. "What are you waiting for?" I asked. "I do not know," he said, his voice dreary with the despair of centuries of hopelessness. "I only know that I must wait. That compulsion is greater than my strength to combat." The tone of his voice changed slightly. "The tunnel about me is widening, and now the walls have receded into invisibility. The tunnel has become a plain, but the plain is as desolate, as forlorn and dreary as was the tunnel, and still I stand and wait. How long must this go on?" He felt silent again, and I was about to prompt him with another question. I could not afford to let the time run out in long silences, but abruptly the muscles about his eyes tightened, and suddenly a new aspect replaced their hopeless dejection. Now they expressed a black, bottomless terror. For a moment, I marveled that so small a portion of a facial anatomy could express such horror. "There is something coming toward me," he said. "A beast of brutish foulness. Beast is too inadequate a term to describe it, but I know no words to tell its form. It is an intangible and evasive thing, but very real, and it is coming closer. It has no organs of sight as I know them, but I feel that it can see me, or rather that it is aware of me with a sense sharper than vision itself. It is very near, God. It is very near now. Oh, God, the malevolence, the hate, the potentiality of awful, fearsome destructiveness that is its very essence. And still I cannot move." The expression of terrified anticipation centered in his eyes, lessened slightly, and was replaced instantly by its former deep, deep despair. "I am no longer afraid," he said. "Why?" I interjected. "Why?" I was impatient to learn all that I could before the end came. "Because," he paused, "because it holds no threat for me. Somehow, someday, I understand. I know that it, too, is seeking for which I wait. What is it doing now? I asked. It has stopped beside me, and we stand together, gazing across the stark, empty plain. Now a second awful entity with the same leashed virulence above it moves up and stands at my other side. We all three wait, myself with a dark fear of this dismal universe, my unnatural companions with patient, malicious menace. Bits of, he faltered, I can name it only aura, go out from the beasts like an acid stream and touch me, and the hate and the venom chill my body like a wave of intense cold. Now there are others of the awful breed behind me. We stand, waiting for that which will come. What it is, I do not know. I could see the pallor of death creeping steadily into the last corners of his lips, and I knew that the end was not far away. Suddenly, a black frustration built up within me. "What are you waiting for?" I screamed, the tenseness and the importance of this moment forcing me to lose the iron self-control upon which I have always prided myself. I knew that the answer held the secret of what I must know. If I could learn that, my experiment would not be in vain, and I could make whatever preparations were necessary for my own death. I had to know that answer. Think, I pleaded. What are you waiting for? I do not know. The dreary despair in his eyes, sightless as they met mine, chilled me with a coldness that I felt in the marrow of my being. I do not know, he repeated. Yes, I do know. Abruptly, the plasmatic film cleared from his eyes, and I knew that for the first time, since the poison struck, he was seeing me clearly. I sensed that this was the last moment before he left, for good. It had to be now. Tell me, I command you, I cried. What are you waiting for? His voice was quiet as he murmured, softly, implacably, before he was gone. We are waiting, he said, for you.
This is the story of how a novelty toaster ruined my life. First of all, I want to clarify that I'm not the kind of guy who buys a novelty toaster. I got it at a White Elephant gift exchange a couple of years back. You know, one of the swaps where everyone brings a gift and then you pick blindly and see what you get. Well, what I got was a toaster that burned the image of Jesus into the toast. People seeing Jesus in their breakfast was big for a while, I guess. I kind of remember when that was a thing. Anyway, this toaster made it so you could have a miracle every meal. At least, that's what it said on the box. I kind of hoped someone would steal the gift so I'd get another chance at drawing, but no one did, so I took it home, put it on a shelf in the garage, and forgot about it. Then, sometime in the middle of last year, my regular toaster quit working. I put in a couple of slices for breakfast, pushed the lever, and realized 10 minutes later that the toast had never popped up. For a minute, I panicked. Sure, that it was on fire and I somehow hadn't noticed, but as it turned out, the toaster contained 2 slices of perfectly cool, untoasted bread. Ordinarily, I wouldn't have even cared, but I had someone over and I was kind of trying to make a big thing out of breakfast. You know how it is. I'd made bacon and scrambled eggs, and toast is just part of that. You can't make a plate with eggs, bacon, and some floppy, uncooked bread. And the eggs and bacon were already done, so I was committed to the meal at this point. I'd started preheating the oven, figuring I could probably manage to toast the bread in there if I was careful, when I suddenly remembered the novelty toaster out in the garage. It only took a minute or so of rooting around before I came up with my prize. Breakfast was saved. The toaster performed as advertised. It took bread and made it into toast. I popped the first couple of slices out, noted that they did, in fact, have a face slightly burned into one side, then promptly cut them into triangles for better presentation on the plate. That was about as much attention as I was inclined to pay to the toast, but my overnight companion was apparently a more curious sort. "What's with the bread?" she asked, holding up one of the triangles and turning it back and forth, trying to make sense of the markings. Goofy toaster thing," I told her. "Puts the face of Jesus on your toast. I didn't buy it. I got it as a gift a while ago. I only got it out today because my regular toaster died. I'm not weirdly into Jesus." I was rambling, but that was all right because she wasn't listening. She picked up the other triangle and was holding the two pieces together, looking at the full picture. "Doesn't look much like Jesus," she said. "Well, it's heating elements on bread. You're only going to get so good a picture." "Sure, but doesn't Jesus usually have a beard?" I looked. It was actually a surprisingly clear picture. There was some nice shading, which I found very impressive given the medium. My date was right, though. It didn't look anything like Jesus. It was a slightly heavy-set guy, a little bit jowly, probably late 50s. He had glasses and a scowl on his face. He didn't look holy at all. "Huh," was my intelligent contribution. I held up my own piece of toast, which showed what appeared to be the same man in profile. This had to be a joke from someone at the factory. Someone had swapped out the plates or whatever was inside. Well, maybe it's Jesus in his later years. Jesus didn't have any later years, my date pointed out. "I know how to solve this problem." I took a large bite of the toast. "There, now it's not a picture of anybody." It's funny. I genuinely can't remember her name or what she looked like, but I remember that face burned into the toast. It had kind of stuck in my mind even before I knew it was important. It really was an excellent likeness of someone who was definitely not Jesus, and that seemed like a weird sort of screw-up to have happened in the manufacturing process. If it hadn't looked like anything, I could have understood that, but to look distinctly like a different person? So the toast was still on my mind when I went out for groceries that day. I wasn't actively thinking about it or anything, but it was still there. Enough so that when I spotted a heavy-set guy down at the end of the aisle, my first thought was, he looks kind of like the guy from my toast. We were heading opposite ways down the aisle, getting closer to each other, and as he drew near, I started to get weirded out. He didn't just look kind of like the guy from my toast. He looked exactly like him. Same glasses, same slightly sagging cheeks, same haircut. I told myself that I was imagining it, that it was just a strange coincidence, but I couldn't stop staring. The more I looked, the more certain I was. I'd seen this man in my toast this morning. "You need something?" He'd caught me staring. "No, sorry, you just remind me of someone." "Yeah? Who?" "Jesus," I thought. But the man didn't look like he had much of a sense of humor. I just shook my head and said, "Just someone I used to know. You're the wrong age, though. Sorry." We pushed our carts past each other and went our separate ways. I refrained from looking back over my shoulder for fear that he'd catch me staring again. But when I got home, I put another slice of bread into the toaster. The image that came out was definitely the man I'd seen in the grocery store. I told myself that it was just a weird coincidence. The toaster had a weird flaw. The guy had a generic kind of face. That was all it was. But it was still bugging me when I got up the next morning. So I made toast again. I had a vague idea that I could reverse image search the picture, maybe find some sort of facial recognition program to compare it to online photos or something. I don't really know how this stuff works. I just know it's out there. In any case, it turned out to be irrelevant. When the toast popped up, I snagged it out of the toaster and was confronted with a picture of a totally different person. This one was a man with a hipster beard in maybe his mid-20s. No glasses, no scowl, no chance that it was the same image as yesterday. The profile view showed some odd markings below his ear, maybe birthmarks. It was clearly an image of a specific person. There was no way I could dismiss this as a defect. I put in another piece of toast and got the same image back, as identical as variations in the surface of the bread would allow. I peered inside the toaster, trying to see the piece that made the image, but all I could see was flat, featureless metal. It was like it was creating these pictures out of nothing at all. I thought about opening it up, but there was a label on it, warning of a risk of severe electric shock, and I had no idea what I'd even be looking for anyway. Some sort of plate with shifting pins? That might explain how it was able to do two different pictures, but not how it made a picture of a man I saw later in the day. That part really was just happenstance, I told myself as I ate my toast. It's just got some sort of pre-programmed set of options, and one of them happens to be a generic older white guy. I probably saw dozens of guys like that every day. Really, there were lower odds that a toasted image wouldn't look like one of them when you thought about it. In fact, that explained the whole thing. I looked around online and found that you could buy selfie toasters where you could put in whatever image you wanted. This must have been one of those models that had somehow gotten into the wrong box. They probably made them all in the same factory. Once I could figure out how to change the settings, I'd stop getting the factory presets on my toast. I was able to keep telling myself this, right up until I took my dog Odin out to the dog park. He was having a good time, roughhousing with the other dogs, but at one point it started to turn a little too serious. I stepped in to grab his collar, just as the owner of the other dog came to pull his away. I was looking down at Odin at first, so he didn't really register at first. All I saw was the hand on the collar and a pair of skinny jeans. Thanks, I said as I looked up. Sorry about... I froze as I found myself looking directly at the man who'd been on this morning's toast. Same facial features, same beard. The marks behind his ear that I hadn't been able to make out in the toast were a series of small tattooed stars. It was perfectly clear now that I was looking at him in person. The image had definitely been him, not just someone like him. It was too perfect to be a coincidence. No problem, he said, not seeming to notice my alarm. Come on, Bruno. If you're gonna be a bully, you can't play. He gave me a half wave as he towed his dog away. I stared after him, trying to figure out what this meant. Something insane was going on. My toaster was predicting the future, or I'd just gone totally crazy. Of the two, the second option seemed a lot more likely. People went crazy every day, after all. Toasters very rarely became prophets. Odin twisted in my grip, anxious to get back to running around with the other dogs. I let him go and watched with envy. He was carefree, blissfully unaware of magic toasters and whatever strange messages they were trying to send. Enjoy it while you can, I told him on the car ride home. When I get sent to the loony bin, you're gonna end up at the pound. Then you'll understand why this matters. I became obsessed with the toaster. I had to know what it meant, what it was trying to tell me. I made toast every morning and studied the two pictures, looking for anything that connected them to the previous ones. I took photos so that I could compare multiple days of images side by side. I took notes, made measurements, searched for answers. I could find no links. The people were random each day. All races, all genders, all ages. They were most often in the range of 25 to 50 years old. But there were more than a few whose wrinkles stood out prominently in the chart, and at least a couple of children who couldn't have been any older than 8. The ratio was about 60-40 men to women, but there was no clear pattern for when one or the other would appear. Sometimes I'd go a week with nothing but women in my toast. The only thing they all had in common was that I saw them at some point during my day. It was usually just a passing glance, but as my obsession grew, I began to scan crowds as I walked through them, determined to catch my target unawares. I reasoned that if I could follow them, maybe overhear them, I might find out what connected them all. This, too, was of no use. I did begin to spot many of them before they saw me, and even successfully followed a few unobtrusively. They all simply seemed to be going about their lives, though, no different than anyone else I had passed. Why then did the toaster care about these specific people? I found out almost by accident. Actually, completely by accident for certain meanings of the word. I was out walking Odin one day, doing my now standard paranoid scan of my surroundings. I noticed I'd caught the attention of a young family walking on the other side of the street and gave them a cheery wave, trying to act like I was normal. Their child, a small boy, spotted Odin. His eyes lit up. "Doggy!" he yelled. Before his parents could stop him, he took off at a run, directly across the street and into the path of an oncoming car. I don't recall hearing the child scream. I do remember the twin screams of the parents as the car sent their son spinning away, tossed through the air like a bag of garbage. I remember the screeching tires as the car skidded to a halt, and then again as the driver saw what he'd hit and fled the scene. I saw the driver's face as he looked back, pale and shocked, even frozen in horror as it was. I recognized the man from that morning's toast. The boy, unbelievably, was all right. More or less, anyway. One leg was badly broken, and an entire side of his face was bleeding from being scraped across the pavement, but he was lucid and crying, which, under the circumstances, seemed like a very good thing. The parents took their son to the hospital while I waited for the police. "Any chance you saw the plate?" the policeman asked me, after I'd given him my story. "No, but I can describe the driver." I gave a thorough description based on what I'd seen in the toast. The policeman looked skeptical. "Yeah, you saw all that in the instant he turned back?" "I had a very clear view of him," I insisted. "It's sort of burned in." They let me talk to a sketch artist, who ended up making a very good likeness of the man. They even put it up on the evening news, though I think none of the police expected anything to come of it. It worked, though. According to the news, the next night the man turned himself in after seeing his face on the news. He begged for clemency, saying that he wasn't a bad person, he just panicked in the moment. That got me thinking. What if what linked the people wasn't a common goal or plan, but a concept? Not something they were on the outside, but something they were on the inside. The next day, my toast had a picture of a bearded man with facial tattoos. The two pictures looked more like mugshots than ever. On a whim, I went to the website for the local jail and started clicking through the recent bookings. It only took a few minutes before I was presented with a mugshot that looked almost identical to the picture in my toast. Richard Bowman, booked on a swath of charges, ranging from drug possession all the way up to murder in the first degree. My plan had been to go out to the jail to see him, but then I thought, what if I didn't? What would happen if I disproved one of the toaster's predictions? Now that I knew where it thought I would be, I could just not go there. I had free will, after all. Then I thought of all the ways I could meet a violent criminal that didn't involve walls separating us, and decided that this wasn't the time to test causality theories on my psychic toaster. I hopped in my car and drove off to the jail. On the way there, I tried to figure out how to ask to talk to Bowman. They probably knew who his family was, and they definitely knew his lawyer. I probably needed credentials to pose as a reporter. I thought about just saying, I saw him in my breakfast, but decided this was not really a situation that called for the truth. In the end, I didn't have to say anything. As I was parking outside the jail, I saw several guards overseeing a half-dozen men being loaded into a small bus. One of them turned and met my gaze. Even with the distance and fences between us, I recognized Richard Bowman. With Bowman being transported, I could easily imagine all sorts of scenarios where he and I met under less separated circumstances. I congratulated myself on my decision not to test the toaster's abilities. I was at least beginning to form a theory about whose picture the toaster created. It was showing me people who had done or would do bad things. Over the next few weeks, I tested this theory and slowly refined it to be more precise. Each day, the toaster showed me the worst person I would see that day. Some people, like the man from the hit and run, had just made one very bad decision. Others, if I made a point of going where I knew they would be, would show up day after day. Often, they seemed to be perfectly normal citizens. No one but me knew what they were actually like. I fantasized about digging up their secrets, private investigator style, and turning them over to the police. Everyone would be amazed at my prowess. "We had no idea," they would say. "However did you figure it out?" I would tell them about my investigative techniques. I would not tell them about my toaster. The morning toast had turned from a worrying aberration into an exciting puzzle. I researched the people it showed me, hunting for hints about what might have been in their past. I watched the news to see if anything they had done that day featured. It was a game, and it was fun, until the day my mother came to visit. It all started innocuously enough. She called to say that she'd be in town for a week for work, and I invited her to stay at my house. "If it's not an imposition," she said. "No, of course. It'll be great to see you for a week." "I'll bring your stickers," she promised. I laughed. Growing up, Mom had always traveled for work. She was gone about a week every month, and for as long as I could remember, she'd always brought me back a small sticker from wherever she'd gone. I had a huge wall map of the United States that was covered in these stickers. She and I would put them on the map together over the city she'd been in, and she would write the date on it. The map was folded up in a box somewhere, but I still had it. Mom was continuing to travel for work, and whenever I saw her, she'd give me the envelope full of stickers she'd been saving for me. I hadn't gotten around to putting a lot of them on in the last few years, but I always meant to, and I still enjoyed getting the stickers. Mom rolled in early on Saturday morning. She'd always preferred to drive through the night, so I knew to expect her early. Still, she got there before I was fully functional, so I let her in and told her to get set up in the guest room while I showered and generally made myself presentable. I emerged from the bathroom to the smell of breakfast cooking. Mom waved at me from the table as I entered the kitchen. "I made breakfast. I hope you don't mind. There's plenty for you. By the way, I love your toaster." I let out a small laugh. "Yeah, where did you get the pictures of me?" My blood ran cold. My mother was holding up a piece of toast which unmistakably bore her image. She was smiling as if it meant nothing. And why would it mean anything to her? But to me, it was horrifying. "You okay?" Mom asked, noticing my sudden freeze. "Yeah, I'm fine." I forced a smile. Breakfast sounds great. How was your drive?" We made small talk as we ate. I pretended everything was fine, but I heard almost nothing she said. My mind was racing. This couldn't possibly be right. My mother was a wonderful woman. She was no saint, but there was no way she was the worst person I was going to see today. Unless maybe we didn't go out? That would make sense. If I just stayed in all day and didn't see anyone other than her, then by default, she'd have to be the worst person I saw. That was probably all it was. "I used up the last of your milk in my coffee," my mother said, "and I noticed that your fridge is a little low on veggies. You're eating well, I hope?" "Yes, Mom, I'm fine. I just usually go grocery shopping on Saturdays, so I'm low on stuff." "Well, don't let me break up your routine. I'm sure I can entertain myself while you're out." "I can go later." "Don't be ridiculous. Go, do. Pretend I'm not even here." Reluctantly, I left the house to go to the store. I tallied the people I passed. Every person who met my eyes, clanging another condemnation against my mother. She was worse than that man, worse than that woman, worse than that whole family. By the time I got home from the store, I'd crossed paths with hundreds of people. I wondered if she'd hit something on her way here, like the man I'd seen before. Someone I didn't want to say to myself. But her car looked fine, and she seemed completely unrattled. Still, something bad must have happened. Maybe she stole something from me while I was at the store. I turned it over in my mind all day, watching her for clues. I saw nothing out of the ordinary. The next day, I was up before my mother. I wanted to hide the toaster before she saw someone else's face on the toast and asked questions about who it was. I thought about telling her my theory, but I obviously couldn't now. Before I put the toaster away, though, I popped in a piece of bread and set it to toast. I wanted to know who to be looking for later on. A few minutes later, the toast popped up. For the second day in a row, it was a picture of my mother. I left the toaster on the counter. Mom wouldn't have any suspicions. She would think it just made sense to have the same picture day after day. Anyone would. Anyone but me. My thoughts whirled. Was my mother hiding some dark secret from me? She didn't seem any different. How long had she been doing it? I Googled her hometown crime statistics. Missing pets, missing people. Nothing looked out of the ordinary. I started to breathe more easily. Whatever it wasn't as severe as I feared. Then my mother came in for breakfast. She had an envelope in her hand. "I've got your stickers. Do you still keep them on the map? Where is it?" "It's out in the garage," I told her. "It's put away right now." "Well, unput it away. We've got stickers to put on." I rummaged around in the garage and returned with the map. We spread it across the table. Mom clucked her tongue as she looked at my pile of unattached stickers. "You're so far behind." "Well, I have my own record of where I've been. We'll get this fixed up." So saying, she picked up one of the stickers and affixed it to the town where it belonged, adding the date she'd been there. An idea that had been tugging at my sleeve for attention suddenly grabbed me by the wrist and pulled. Her hometown wasn't the place to look for unusual activities. The travel map was. All of the locations marked with the dates she'd visited. That was what I needed to search. I waited until she went to bed that night, then took my laptop into the kitchen and set it on the map. I picked a city at random, Denver, then pulled up a missing persons website. I told myself that I'd start with the worst thing possible to get it out of the way first, then move on to more reasonable ideas. There were 2 people who had gone missing from Denver around the date of my mom's travel. I told myself that it was fine, that Denver was a big city. I just needed to pick somewhere smaller. Ogden caught my eye, down in Utah. I put it into the database. Another missing person. On and on I went, frantically typing in city after city. I breathed a sigh of relief every time I found no match, but there were far too few of those. More than half, maybe even more than 2/3 of the ones I checked had people who had gone missing while she was there. This was everything I'd been looking for in all of my research on the strangers I'd seen in my toast. This was the huge case, the break no one else was ever going to get. Her pattern didn't exist if you didn't know where she'd been over the years. I knew. The map laid it all out. It would link together hundreds of cold cases. And all I had to do was turn my own mother in to the police. She was a murderer, a serial killer, the most prolific one I'd ever heard of. The evidence was all there in front of me, and even if I tried to explain it away, the toast made it clear that I was lying to myself. I laid awake all night agonizing over this. The next morning, my mother commented on it. "You look rough. You should get more sleep before work on Mondays. Here, I made you breakfast." She passed me the toast. It had her face on it. All week, I fought with myself. I told myself that I'd misunderstood something, made some illogical leap. Meanwhile, I kept finding new articles of bodies found in shallow graves matched to missing persons whose dates and locations coincided with my mother's travels. And every day, no matter where I went or how many people I saw, the toast bore my mother's face. Friday night, the local news had a report about a teen who had been missing since last week. "Poor kid," my mother remarked. "I hope they find him." I thought of the news articles of the people they had found, the bodies buried on the roadside. I searched her face for any hint of compassion or remorse and saw nothing. She was utterly unconcerned. She left late that night. I knew what I had to do. I had to call the police. If I didn't, there was every reason to believe that she would find a new target on the way home, a new victim to leave under shallow sands for the animals to dig up. She had to be stopped, and I was the only one who could do it. I was the only one who knew. I turned the phone over and over in my hands. I stared at the screen. I dialed no numbers. Eventually, I went to bed. The next morning, the toast showed me my picture. It's been the same every day since. I know what I need to do to stop it. I know what has to be done. Instead, I just tell people that it's a selfie toaster. It's easier that way.
I, Franklin C. Little, being of sound body and mind, do hereby leave my entire earthly possessions to my estranged son, Franklin Jr., on the condition he be sworn to secrecy of the contents of this last will and testament, and the information I am about to divulge. It is my wish that he inherits all assets, royalties, and rights for my entire literary collection, though I do not wish him to inherit one item, and I shall explain why in a personal letter which I shall attach along with my will. This letter is not to be opened until my timely demise, and not for the eyes of any but my heir. On one final note, I wish my study to be closed off permanently and never to be reopened. I must restate that one demand to reflect how important it is to me, and if after my passing my solicitor should discern that my son has opened the study once more, that this will be cast null and void, and my entire collection of possessions be donated to Our Lady of the Church's orphanage. The one item I wish to remain in my possession and not to be given to anyone is my typewriter, which I wish to be left in my study when it is sealed off. Signed, Franklin C. Little. Dear Franklin Jr., you may be wondering why I have chosen to write you in a letter and not simply tell you everything I must by my bedside in these hours of my failing health. But as we both know, these past years we have drifted apart, and I know this is somewhat due to the fact of your mother's passing. Conversation between us in these dwindling moments of my health are few and far between, and it is my wish that after I die, you read this in the hope of clarifying my actions these past years. Please don't think of me any the lesser for my mistakes in what you should read, as my mind has been plagued with darkness. It was in the month of May many years ago that I happened upon that vile and sinister thing that you will soon come to know and fear as much as I have these past years. As you may know, my mental health before I began to be known for my penmanship has not been great, and I was meeting with a professional for some time. It was after a few months of seeing him that my psychiatrist told me that I should delve deeper into my hobby of scribbling down penny dreadfuls. And after writing a few short stories, I handed them in to him. To say he was impressed is an understatement. He bid me go out and find a typewriter as every self-respective slave to the literary press possesses one. This is where our story begins. The city of London was a far different place back then, my son. Not the clean and quiet safe haven that you have inhabited your entire life. It was poor and underclass, and it was while wandering down those many dark and mysterious laneways of our magnificent city that I came to a shop of the name of Mungo's Mysterious Maladies. The writing outside of the shop was peeling, the windows blackened, and the narrow shop located between a printing house and tavern should have been the last place I wanted to enter without risking the chance of catching some ailment or other. But something seemed to call me to enter, a magnetic force of nature that drew me in. Upon entering, I found many different and strange objects occupying tableaus, shrunken heads, ancient-looking pottery, leather-bound and cracking tomes of sinister-seeming origin. It was while inspecting one of these enchanting tomes that a squat man of some Asiatic origin appeared beside me. He goaded me for touching one of his items, but after a few moments of strangled conversation, I had clarified to him that I was seeking something in the literary field, and wished to know if he possessed anything of the sort. His eyes took on a knowing look, and then he grew somber, waving for me to follow him to the back of the shop, where we entered a back room. It was here, among dusty pianos, chemistry sets, and other odd paraphernalia, that I discovered what would come to entirely possess me of mind, body, and spirit for the next 2 decades. The shopkeeper showed me to a typewriter covered in dust. With no name of make inscribed on it, I thought it a reject at first. I haggled with the man for an age, and after relinquishing 2 weeks' pay as a clerk, I sorely carried my newly gained contraption home. Oh, now speaking to you, how I wished I had never entered that foul shop, that I had never laid eyes on that malicious, deadly hulk of metal that consumed me entirely. How my spirit soared that day sitting down in my study in front of the typewriter. How my hopes flew like a bird carried by a gale. But soon I would know the danger I had fallen into. It was in the years after that I thought long and hard over that first story I had written. How I wonder, had it been from my own twilit imagination that it raised its maleficent head? Or had it been some psychological connection between myself and the typewriter, and I was merely a puppet being pulled by its strings, simply a vessel for it to seep its poisonous venom inside of? Laying my finger on that typewriter as I depressed the key, I felt a sharp stinging sensation beneath my finger, and lifting it I saw a tiny drop of blood had appeared on the skin. Perplexed, I took a pen and again depressed the key, seeing this time that a tiny spike came out from inside of the key once pressed. I sat for some time looking at that typewriter, considering should I return it, but a sensation came over me. Perhaps it was curiosity, and simply that. but it felt as if the typewriter called to me, promising me sweet tales and dreams never before dreamt. It seemed to flow from me, as if the words themselves appeared on the paper as my fingers blurred over the keys, and the stinging sensation from each tap soon faded, as did my consciousness, drifting away as the typewriter showed me elements of the story without me even knowing it was happening. The story that soon lay in my possession exceeded anything I had ever expected to come from my own very hands, and ecstatic, I rushed to my psychiatrist and showed the story to him. To say he was not pleased is an understatement. That tale of dark lands and sinister creatures, of dark islands smothered in fog where slithering things did roam, that had so enraptured me seemed to disgust him, and I could see his hands shaking as he handed me back the pages. I returned home utterly discouraged, but the typewriter, it called to me. To try to describe what the lure of imagination is like to someone who has never been lost in its depths of wonder is a hard burden, my son. One that even one as myself so experienced in it cannot fathom. I soon found myself at the typewriter without even knowing of my movements, and the moon outside passed by the window as my fingers glided over those piercing spikes that hungered for my flesh as much as I hungered for its tale. And a tale it did tell. Images floated in front of my eyes of a familiar city, of a man walking up a laneway. Inside this man's coat there was a knife, and inside his heart there was a need, an urge. He stood in a dark doorway watching a familiar face pass by. The man followed the face, hidden beneath a top hat, and the knife appeared from beneath the coat as if by magic. As if the world itself had been waiting for this moment, and nothing could change it. Inside the laneway, the two men passed, and the knife came closer. It was after bringing the new story to my psychiatrist the next day that I saw the blood. The body lay out flat, covered by a sheet, and the 3 policemen standing nearby guiding the watchful citizens past fluidly. But I knew who was beneath that sheet without a doubt, and my eyes passed up along the street to where my psychiatrist resided, knowing that his footsteps would never sound upon his doorway ever again. I returned home then, fixated to bring back this accursed typewriter from whence it came. But after searching and searching for hours through the streets, I finally came upon the print shop and tavern that Mungo's mysterious maladies had been located between. It was gone. Not empty. Not a different shop in its place. I could have accepted that. There was no shop there. I swore myself to never use the typewriter again. But that night, I woke up to find myself sat in front of it, fingers resting on the keys, heart thumping in my chest. And the dreams called to me. They filled my mind with a beautiful scene of horror, of majestic spires where unhuman things stirred, of swamps and castles where weary travelers took refuge, never to be seen again. and these stories flowed from me as easily as the blood flowed from my fingers. It was as if the typewriter had become a part of me, an extended limb, powered by the beating of my own heart. The next day, I found myself outside of a local printing house. The editor took one look at the stories I had made and tried to pay me off with coppers, but I fought and earned my share. The weeks passed and the dreams intensified until I found it hard to separate fact from fiction, and my nights were filled with screaming villages covered in flames, of skies clouded by floating monsters over a dead city of London, of one-eyed ghouls lurking inside of my study, awaiting its turn to feed from me. I fell into such a state of distress that I no longer went outside. I no longer cooked. I no longer read. The typewriter took all of me for itself, like a vampire in one of my stories, a silent Nosferatu, content in its study of ominous design. It fed on me and possessed my mind to the point where I rarely got out of bed, and I tried in vain to ignore its call, to retain my flesh and what little sanity I had left. Through these tales I made a fortune, as the city of London fell in love with my penny dreadfuls. Of my tales of Spring-Heeled Jack who took the streets by storm, filling their minds with wonder, enraptured by the fear of it, addicted to the thrill of it. Tales of the tavern that would move at night and welcome passers-by inside with promise of warmth and food, but would feed on their flesh instead, and shut its door on their bones eternally. I ignored the newspaper clippings of the many murders now taking place around the city, which somewhat blamed my sinister stories for these misdeeds happening, of the mass disappearances. For surely it was not because of my tales. Surely innocent of evil were my nightmares and the spawning woes of the typewriter's design, which captured the city in its iron grip, but left me an empty husk of a man not able to write, envious of the typewriter, loving and hating it at the same time. A housekeeper I hired then, to try to shield myself from the horrors plaguing my every waking moment. And in time I fell in love with your mother. But she would be frightened of the dreams, of my nightmares and my screams that would wake her. I slowly healed from my loss of blood, and once again the dark study with its deadly inhabitant called to me, and I hungered once more for the press of those spikes, for the bliss of oblivion that was the eternal night of its wanderings. You were born then, Franklin. I admit that I was not present, fixated as I was on the typewriter. I could hardly discern your mother's deathly screams in the next room. It was as if the typewriter wanted her soul, and I battled it as you were pushed into this world. Images had passed through my mind for days of her and your demise. That the typewriter showed me these sights, as I have no doubt its purpose was to push me over the edge. As I fear over the years it has slowly turned its eye elsewhere, no longer sated with just the flesh of one man. I feared now its sight fell on you, my son, and I spent months after your birth drafting tales of your adventures in life, of your time spent in the army and your exploration of the interior of Africa. I know you may think this the wanderings of a madman, that I am getting things confused in my advanced age, but know that your life flashed before my eyes in those few months. For years I have battled the stories in my head, trying in vain to change their outcome when it proved painful to you. But each time the typewriter proved itself correct in foreseeing what would befall you. From injuries to illnesses, it predicted it all. And now I sit here, my son, in the twilight of my days, begging you not to listen to its call should it beckon. Leave the ghost of the past behind, sell it all, the entire estate, and go traveling the world, for nothing awaits you inside of that study but the kiss of death. I love you, my son, and should I pass from the realm before we next speak, I wish you to know that in all those years I only fought for you. Yours truly, Franklin C. Little. Taken from the diary of Franklin C. Little, Jr., 13th July. My father passed away last night in his bed. Reeves, his butler, found a letter on his lap and would not mention anything about its contents to me. For weeks now, Father's failing health had made him introspective, seeming to be lost in the worlds he so lovingly created. People flocked to the house, and the church bells ring on the hour to speak of Father's demise, for truly loved by the people of London he was. The undertaker has come and taken the body, leaving me alone with only Reeves, who has grown rigid and more silent than usual, if that was thought possible. Last night I had a strange dream of a shadow inside the house, and it stirred as it awoke. Eyes watched me from the corner of my room, and I fear I've been reading too much of Father's ghost stories lately, for my own imagination has gotten away from me. At night, I sometimes think I can hear voices, whispers, beckoning me to wander through the house and search. Search for what, though, exactly? 17th July. Father's funeral was today. The night before, I had dreamt that I was following the hearse through the streets of London. People watched from windows, their faces featureless, all casting papers out onto the cobbles, all striking a morbid, tuneless hymn that was out of tune with the ringing bells. I stooped down and picked up a sheet and saw it was a page from one of my father's stories, but the sheet had bloodied fingerprints covering it entirely. I looked up and the scene had changed. The room I now stood in was somehow familiar. I knew I had been there before, but couldn't for the life of me remember where it was. On a large table was an ancient typewriter, and it seemed as if it sensed me. Blood flowed from beneath it then, spilling down onto the ground. So much blood. Father's solicitor must speak with me this afternoon regarding the estate, I presume. I don't know what's to become of me. I don't know what's next in life. 18th July. I fear my father may have lost his grip on reality. In a letter left to me, he divulged secrets that no sane man could have imagined. My subconsciousness must have picked up on what had been going on through my father's mind. Of the old study and the typewriter where Father had spent so many years of his life. No wonder he had fallen into madness. After losing Mother, he practically hid himself away from reality, and only Reeves was left to him for company in this large, empty house. I requested Reeves to unseal the door to the study, and at his hesitation, I told him that if he were to inform the solicitor that I had done so, he would soon find himself unemployed and out on the street. I feel bad for speaking to him so, but something I fear has come over me, a fever of sorts. Something urged me to enter that study, and once inside I could feel a presence of some sort, perhaps father, but somehow I fear it isn't. I sat down at the typewriter then, and Reeves practically fled from the room. Gliding my fingers over its keys, it felt somehow right to be there. Like this contraption was a part of me missing for so long, like an extended piece of myself, a mirror into my own mind and soul. I took my notes then and my diary and returned to the study and set myself to taking down everything in print as a memoir toward my father. But I was soon surprised to find that when I pressed down on a key, a spike should pierce the skin of my flesh. I failed to understand why my father would make such a sinister thing such as this. I'm sat in my room now, alone, and only realize Reeves has not called for dinner. No matter. It is not sustenance of the body that I crave, but of the soul. My mind has become entwined with getting these thoughts down on paper, and I find myself warming to the idea of the typewriter. I discovered upon inspecting it that it is designed in an archaic way, never seen before, as it uses the blood of the writer as ink. Who on earth would make such a thing? 19th July. I found Reeves' body hanging from the stairwell. A strange smile splayed across his face. But this wasn't the odd thing that happened this morning. I woke in the study, hands placed upon the typewriter, with pages upon pages of strange writing written upon the parchment in my own blood. I brought it to a local man who studies in foreign texts, but he said it wasn't real, and whoever had given it to me was merely performing a hoax. But sitting here now, as the light in the study fades, I slowly recognize patterns within the text. All my life I spent reading my father's imaginings, but never did I think up these monsters that fill the pages. The house seems to lurk over me as I read more and more, and the more I read, I notice my hands moving, typing even more, and I cannot stop myself. I hear footsteps on the stairwell, but surely it cannot be him. Ignore those footsteps, and for God's sakes, man, ignore these visions that befall before our eyes, of the city in flames and bodies strewn across the streets, of the river Thames running red with the blood of innocent women and children who drown each other as they fight to escape the burning wreck of the world around them. But above is the true horror. Above in the sky it watches with 1,000 eyes that see inside of your soul, and peering through the window at a sky with no moon, I can see its ethereal body floating there, awaiting to be released onto the world. It has always been there, waiting. These horrors flash before my eyes, and they are promised to me. The typewriter has me in its grip, for I flee to my room at night, utterly spent, but I awaken the early hours in the morning and find myself once again bound to its will. Is there any escape from this foul demon, this metal harbinger of evil promises? Of a world where only the timely escape of your earthly body may release you from the restraints of terror that encompasses us all? Screams I hear outside in the streets, and I fear to look. I do not sleep now, for sleep brings with it nightmares. Or perhaps awake is the nightmare, and when I dream I merely awaken. I find myself lost and adrift. I know now why Father did not want me to unseal this study. These 4 walls are a crypt that should have been locked away and forgotten. But here I am, and the screams worsen, and the sky alights with the red flames of hell, and footsteps play on the stairs once more, coming closer and closer. I fear I am mad. God save me. But I awoke this morning once again in the study and found myself locked in. It seems someone has sealed it from the outside, and I am alone in here with it. The typewriter glows in a blood scarlet at night, the same hue that glows in the sky outside. The screams have vanished, but I fear to peer beyond the glass. For what will I see in the abyss of human suffering that I alone have created? No, not I alone. For wasn't it you, Father, who doomed me to this destiny when you chose not to destroy the typewriter? That demon with piercing accursed teeth? I hate it with all my soul. But yet I cannot deny still I am pulled towards it, an urge to sit and to see what images are splayed through its imaginings. The daylight fades, and I fear this may be my last chance. An idea formed in my mind, and I wrote a story that the study was unsealed. I woke from a nap and found the door ajar, the hallway beyond dark and empty. Reeves was gone. Only the footsteps in the dust speak of the fact that I have not fallen mad. He still lurks inside of this house, and he can have it, for I forsake this haunted mansion and the evil sanctuary that is this study. The outside world beckons. Horror! What nightmares slither over the cobbled streets that I once called home? Blackened bodies lay strewn across them like autumn leaves, twisted and drained of their blood as if burnt, but the houses surrounding them are untouched. No, not untouched, for some foul, slimy substance covers everything, and the dark clouds above I sense are filled with poisonous vapors that these creatures breathe, for the oxygen we need are alien to it, as it is alien to our world. I stood by the once sacred waters of the Thames, where the river runs black as the heart of the devil, filled with creatures that lurk just beneath the surface, their eyes yellow and slitted. But above my eye is drawn, where their god rules from the sky, and I find my body frozen in place, as its elongated body, scaled and covered in vent and pores, floats between the storm clouds, and the moon burns bright red as night falls, but still I cannot turn and flee, as lightning sparks through the black clouds, and the demon's thousand eyes pierce my soul. It knows, and those creatures crawl from the Thames, covered in slime and weeds, hulking as they shamble up the cobbles towards me, for they wish me to return to the typewriter and finish what I have started. I am a coward, for I turned and fled instead of letting them take me and put an end to this hell I'm unleashing. And now I find myself back in Father's mansion, the door barred, and once again sat in the study, in front of the typewriter, listening to them slither and shuffle around the mansion, waiting. Pierce my fingers, spikes of hell, drain my body of blood, and leave nothing but a shell of a man behind. Speak to me of a world corrupted by your musings, bereft of humanity, infested with those vile things that feed on whatever goodness and innocence there once was. For in a universe of darkness, what light can be expected to survive this hunger of souls? This feeder on planets and bringer of chaos? For he was always here, Prince of Darkness, Devourer of Flesh, Magus of Madness. His reign is endless, as eternal as the consciousness of the mind, which it shall infect and make its own. For he is not my enemy, and as my fingers turn black and my heartbeat slows, I bow before him and offer him the entirety of my being. I offer him my worthless life and proud I could serve him by bringing about the demise of those who came before him and riddled the world with their cancerous odors, their malignant presence. Reeves beckons me. He smiles with blackened teeth, pale face cast down in shadows, eyes as dark as the endless pit of hell itself, which shall forever be my dwelling henceforth. May he reign until the end of time.
It's my fault. I want to clear that from the top. When I tell you that I was lonely, that I needed a friend, I know that doesn't excuse anything. When I tell you this all started when I was 16 years old, it's just background information. When I explained to you that I was brought up by a single mom and that my dad had been in prison since I was 5, I'm not calling out for your tears. These are just things it's necessary for you to know. If you don't, none of this will make any sense. I need to make sense. I need to keep a clear head. But I'm scared. No, I'm fucking terrified. It's just me in the wide open world now. And him. Trevor Walker, the friend I had needed so badly. My dad sent me a photograph with the only letter I ever received from him while he was in prison. In it, they were standing together smiling. Regular jailhouse buddies. That is, until another prisoner shoved pieces of a broken cafeteria tray into my father's femoral artery and neck. Then Trevor became my friend. And he kept being my friend, even after I didn't want him anymore. Even after I stopped writing to him. But it seems I grew a brain just a little too late. I took a selfie, printed it off at the library at school, and wrote a letter of my own. This is what it said. December 23rd, 2012. Dear Mr. Walker, my English teacher says the art of letter writing is dead. I want to say she'd be happy with me for doing this, for proving her wrong. But I don't think she'd approve. Neither would Mom. But I don't care. My name is Mercy Evans. That's me in the picture. You knew my dad. Did he ever tell you about me? Mom wouldn't let me visit him. I didn't even know he was in jail until I was 10. I might have never found out if Dad hadn't finally written a letter to me. Lucky thing I was the one who got the mail that day. I can't say I miss him. I hardly remember him. But it's right around Christmas when I miss having a dad. Someone to drive home the tree strapped to the roof of the car. Someone to call me his little girl and threaten my boyfriends. If I had a boyfriend, which I don't. But I'm all over the place now. I'm sure you must get lonely there, on the inside. Is that really what they call it? I know a thing or two about you. I know you've always said you were innocent of those terrible things everyone said you did. My dad must have believed you, even if no one else does. I'm ready to believe you too. It's hard to make friends when no one understands who you really are, which is something I can totally relate to. Everyone at Marshall is, like, on a whole different planet from me. Knowing my luck, you probably won't write back. I just figured, what the hell? Show my mom and Mrs. Madsen a thing or two. If you write back, maybe the art of letter writing is still alive. if only in us. Sincerely, your old friend's little girl, Mercy. I made a copy of that letter by hand and kept it. I copied them all. Every single letter I ever wrote to him. I've always been more than a little OCD. I told myself, that first time, that if Mr. Walker should write back, if he referenced anything I had written to him, I'd want to be able to look back on it. I stole a stamp from my mother's purse. Over the years, this was the least of things I had stolen from her. I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror, though, just as I was doing it, and could not help but feel the inevitable self-loathing that brushed across my face like a soft hand that had been dunked in liquid guilt. OCD. Bipolar. Black clothes and pink hair and too much eyeliner and eyeshadow. And way too much death metal. Not enough sun. Not enough talking with normal people. Except for the shrink. And I still think that she never gave a shit. This was me at 16. This was the girl that Trevor Walker answered. And this is what he said. December 31st, 2012.
Dear Mercy, aren't you a sweetheart? It's not often that I get mail, and your letter arrived just before the new year. It's almost as though fate wanted me to know this is a new beginning for us. Is that creepy? I'm sorry it's not meant to be. Call me sentimental, but I get lonely this time of year. My family disowned me ages ago, so having someone to talk to makes me very happy. So you're Evan's daughter, huh? Well, I'll be. Your dad talked about you all the time. Said you were the sweetest little thing. Every week, I'd catch him writing to you. From the sound of it, you never got his letters, huh? Your mom must have thrown them out. I'm real sorry you never got them. There's nothing worse than hoping to hear from a loved one and getting nothing. I know that from experience. I know it ain't much, but I'm here for you. I'm sure your pops would have wanted you to have someone to talk to. You have no idea how much it warms my heart to know you believe I'm innocent. I know we don't know each other much yet, but when the entire world looks at you like a monster, it feels real good to know there are still kind-hearted people out there like you who believe in me. Thanks for the photo. I'll hang it on my wall. Man, you look so much like your father. Got his eyes for sure. I'm sorry about what happened to him. If you ever need to talk about anything, I'm here for you, okay? Your friend, Trevor Walker. P.S. Please forgive my awful handwriting. I'm afraid it's been a while since I've taken pen to paper. I'm a little rusty.
And that was how it all started. Innocent enough, right? Just a fatherless teenage girl trying to connect with, as far as I knew, the only friend that my father ever had. At least while he was in jail. My dad had talked about getting to know wonderful people like Trevor Walker in his letter. And I told myself that this Mr. Walker must be a good man, if my father kept his confidence. When I read about Trevor in some old text-only newspaper stories archived on the internet, I noted how he always maintained that he wasn't guilty of anything. I convinced myself that you couldn't judge a person by what other people said he did. My own memories of Dad didn't include things like armed robbery and pistol-whipping a convenience store clerk. What little I remembered was him holding me, high over his head and laughing, or just looking at me with wide, adoring blue eyes. Not like Mother. By the time I was 16, she'd pretty much given up on me and was just waiting out time so she could kick me out of the apartment. If she were here right now, reading this, I'm sure she'd back me up. She was sick of me, and I was done with her. So the man who claimed that he did not kill those women, well, he was a victim too. That's how I saw it. He was the fourth person ruined by whoever had committed those terrible crimes. I was just so glad he had answered me. I wrote him back right away. January 3rd, 2013. Dear Mr. Walker, Happy New Year. I hope that it's okay to say that, considering, well, you know. Don't worry about your handwriting. I've seen worse. I noticed you put your full name at the bottom of your letter, but I'm still saying Mr. unless you give me permission to do otherwise. Hint, hint. Your letter was right on time. I'd just blown my chemistry midterm, and Mom took that as her opportunity to confiscate my phone and my iPad and yell at me all afternoon. Sometimes I feel like there's no one left for me in the entire world, that I'm shut away in this box with just enough of a window to see how everyone else has a life. It's like you timed your letter to rescue me, or something. Such drama, I know. Sorry, can't help it. I'm so pissed at Mom right now. I wish I could call her out on keeping Dad's letters from me. Think I'll play sick tomorrow and try to find them, if she didn't throw them away. They're mine. That's all there is to it. I'm trying to work out how the Dad I remember could have done the things he was locked up for. I just can't make it stick, even though Mom tells me all the time how guilty he was. I wonder what was going on, that he thought that he needed the money so badly. And of course, she won't tell me anything about that. Kids at school bring my dad up all the time. Counselors and teachers pry into my personal shit every other day, even though I'm already seeing a therapist. One who checks her watch every 10 minutes and labels me a self-fulfilling prophecy. Nice, huh? People. God. I'm sorry for being so mad in this letter. I don't want to scare you off. I'm not always like this. I wish I could meet you in person. Maybe when I'm 18. Please don't be freaked out by that. It's just good to have a friend. Mercy. So yeah, I really wrote that. Don't worry though. I won't bother you with every single letter I ever wrote to him. We'll keep it to the essentials beyond this point. I can't do this all night. Time is a factor for me now. Still, the second letter I got from Trevor Walker is noteworthy. The thing is... No, fuck it. I'll let him speak for himself. January 15th, 2013.
Dear Mercy, aren't you a sweetheart to rape me again? When I saw the mail clerk stop at my cell, I nearly jumped for joy. I don't have much in ways of entertainment here. I'll take anything to take my thoughts off the cement walls of my tiny prison cell. I guess in that way, we're pretty similar, aren't we? I'm sure of it now. I'm sure fate brought us together. We're both trapped, both sequestered from the outside world. But just like I have these letters to remind me that I'm not alone, I hope you know that you're not alone either. You have me. I'm sorry about your mom. Some people have sticks so far up their asses, I swear. You deserve better than her bullshit. If I was her, I'd dote on you day and night. Don't you listen to a word she says about your pops either. You got that? He was a good man, a real good man. Always told me he wanted a better life for you. Buy you nice things and move into a big city. If he hadn't passed, I'm sure he would have gotten out of here someday and followed through on those dreams of his. Shit, I don't doubt it for a second. Now don't you worry about scaring me off, okay? I'm touched you're sharing all this with me. I just wish there was more I could do, you know? But I'll always be here to listen. Or rather to read. But if you come visit me, and I would really love that. I haven't had a visitor in years. I'll get to actually listen to your voice. Wouldn't that be great? Mercy, we're friends, you and I. You don't have to call me Mr. or Walker. You can go ahead and call me Trevor. Here's hoping you got a great year ahead of you. Your friend, Trevor.
And so began 2 years of me referring to this man as Trevor. And that's in spite of the vague, creeping unease I felt at the way he used the words like joy and fate. Worse still, when my common sense tried to reassert itself, was his promise that he would have doted on me. I'd invited all of that, of course. Sure I did. I know that now. Hell, I knew it then. I remember how foolish I'd felt, having all but promised to visit him after my 18th birthday. I remember the calendar advancing toward that date like floodwater under a door. Slow, but inexorable. And knowing that I would have to keep that promise, or somehow back out of it. Nearing the end of my senior year, we had corresponded 31 times. And it wasn't so weird, most of the time. Our letters became conversational and familiar. I trusted him with small secrets. For me, Trevor was a source of positive attention, an uncritical adult who told me so many things I really did want to hear. Things I needed to hear. About my problems, my life, my dead and half-forgotten dad. Speaking to him through the mail was safe, and I adopted mail gathering as one of my daily chores. Mom didn't seem to mind. Why should she? It wasn't like Dad was going to send me another letter. Incidentally, I never did find the old letters Dad had supposedly sent. I was sure that Mom must have gotten rid of them, but there wasn't any point in asking. She would deny they ever existed, and I'd never know if she was lying or not. Anyway, letter writing always provided that perfect cushion of space. I realized I wanted that cushion. I began to suspect somehow that I needed it. But by the week before my 18th birthday, Trevor had reminded me of this so-called promise I had allegedly made in all 3 of his most recent letters. And in the last one, he announced that I was officially on his approved visitor list. Staring at that letter, I knew I could not put it off any longer. Decision time, I thought. Do you really want to see this man in person, Mercy? Thinking clearly for the first time about anything as it related to Trevor Walker, I really did do my best to fix the problem. May 29th, 2015. Hi, Trevor. Hope everything is cool with you. I'm sitting by this creek bank, in the woods, outside of the New Glaswick strip mall, using my English binder as a sort of portable desktop while I try to write this. I'm crying, and my hands are shaking. So now I guess it'll be you who might complain about the whole handwriting issue. Daddy took me here once, just before it all went to hell. There's crayfish in the water, but other than that, I'm all alone. This is a good place to come when you want to be all alone. I had another fight with Mom today, and it was really, really bad. I told her about us. Don't say it. I know it was dumb. I guess I just wanted to open up a little. Try to make things right with her in an honest way before going out on my own. Mom said she would help pay my college tuition, so I thought that meant maybe she wanted to make things better too, before I was gone for good. But when I told her about the letters, about me wanting to visit you, Trevor, now she says she'll cut me off and just throw me out right away if I do that. And I know she means it. I know I've messed everything up. I hope you'll forgive me, but I just can't come and see you. Not until I'm done with college. Please, please understand. I hope this somehow all makes sense to you. I've explained it the best I can. I'm sorry. Mercy. My best, however, was a lie. Mom wasn't going to pay for my college, although it was true that I might be allowed to hang around at home if I stayed serious about it. You see, I'd actually turned things around in 11th grade. I had decided that the only person who was going to make my life right was me. And I had found that, with a bit of effort and more positive outlook, it wasn't actually that difficult. By 12th grade, I was in the running for a hardship scholarship, and I had qualified to enroll at the local community college. Part-time work at the student deli would supplement my loans and Pell Grants. I was an honor student. I'd even made a few friends. The truth was that I didn't need Trevor anymore. Oh, and I didn't cry while writing that letter either. I did write it by the creek bank, though. Just like I said, I was honest about that much. Trevor didn't waste much time in answering. June 8th, 2015.
Dear Mercy, your mother is a damn dirty bitch, and I hope she gets what's coming to her one day. It ain't right to treat such a sweetheart like you that way. It ain't right to make you a liar. Your father always kept his promises, you know? Always. I believe you will too. I can wait a few more years. I mean, it's not your fault. Hell, I'm not going anywhere. But in the meantime, would you send me a few more pictures? It brings me so much joy to see how you flourished these past couple of years. I keep them on my wall. Look at them every morning when I wake up and every night before I go to bed. You look so much like your father. Got his eyes. If I ever get out of here, maybe you and I can sit by the water and look at the crawfish together. Would you like that? I would. The only thing that keeps me sane in this godforsaken place is knowing you're out there thinking about me. I need you, Mercy. I need you as much as you need me. Remember that, all right? I don't know what I'd do without you. Your friend, Trevor.
I sat on my bed and stared at the letter. By the time I realized what was happening, it was almost too late. I ran out of my bedroom, clutching the letter in a sweaty ball of my clenched right hand, and found I could not let it go until I was leaning safely over the open toilet. I don't think I've ever thrown up so violently in my life. If I had, prior to that moment, still felt that Trevor Walker was innocent of the crimes he was accused of committing, that letter set me good and straight. For 2 years, I had been corresponding with a killer. My father had been friends with a killer. And now my entire college experience would be tainted with a mistake I had begun making when I was 16 years old. I'd be on the clock again. It would be ticking down the days until Trevor would be expecting me to visit him, to fuel whatever desperate, despairing, perverted fantasies he used as masturbation fuel on his prison cot at night. He wanted more pictures. He wanted the up-to-date version of what I looked like. He wanted to track my progress toward becoming a woman. I threw up again, noticed my mother at the doorway watching me, saying nothing. I screamed at her to leave me alone. She did, swearing under her breath, something about me being a neurotic little bitch. Later, it would occur to me that the trait was inherited. You know how you always think of that perfect comeback when the moment's long gone? Anyway, I was making too much of this. He was locked up after all. I spit, flushed the toilet, steadied my breathing. What could he really do? The days of me writing letters to Trevor Walker were fucking finished. But Trevor, it turned out, was not finished with me. September 15th, 2015.
Dear Mercy, haven't heard from you in a while. The fucking mail clerk must have lost your letter. Don't you just hate when that happens? Or maybe my letter's the one that got lost. Maybe you didn't get my last reply and you're waiting for me. If so, I'm sorry. I wouldn't leave you waiting like that. I'd never do that to you. I could never be that cruel. I know you wouldn't be that cruel either. I'm all you've got. You're all I've got. Can't wait to hear from you again, sweetheart. Your friend, Trevor.
I wasn't too surprised to find this particular letter in the mailbox. Actually, if I was surprised by anything, it was that he took 3 months to send it. I could see that he suspected the truth. It was all in the way he used the word cruel. He knew what I was doing. Deep down, he knew it, even if he was in denial about it. And he was trying in that slimy way of his to guilt me into writing back. Not gonna happen, Trevor, I thought, sliding this letter into my desk drawer at home. I stared at the pile. I should throw them all away. But I didn't, nor did I take them to the police and file for a restraining order. The thought of my correspondence with Trevor becoming public was unbearable. The news would have a field day with it. It'd be like those crazy women who wrote letters to Manson or Bundy wanting to marry them. That wasn't going to be me. I was finally getting my shit together. I was in my first week of college, and Mom didn't even talk about throwing me out anymore. Maybe actually seeing me try to make something of myself had something to do with it. Perhaps she was contemplating the empty nest and putting it off as long as she could. I don't know. We still don't always get along. But somehow, now that either one of us could legally separate herself from the other at a moment's notice, we had found a way to respect each other's boundaries. And I was reluctant to leave. Most of my reasons were financial, but there was this other reason too. She couldn't know about Trevor. Sooner or later, his letters would stop coming. Until they did, I had no choice but to stay. 2 months later, he wrote me this. November 20th, 2015.
Dear Mercy, you're not ignoring me, are you? Starting to think you've forgotten about me, about our bond. But there's no way. We've got too much in common. We're friends. Friends don't leave friends waiting this long. It's getting cold here. The leaves outside have turned red and brown. I wonder what it must look like to you. I only get to see the same trees over and over again, year after year. I know them by heart. The ones that turn yellow, those that go brown, the crimson ones, they're my favorite. Red is such a soothing color. It's the color of life. It's the color of death. It's beautiful. How have you been? How's college life? Is that why you haven't answered my mail? Hadn't occurred to me that maybe you moved away to attend class. Maybe your skank of a mother found my letters and threw them out. Burned them, maybe. Wouldn't put it past her. She won't stop us, though. I'll just keep writing and writing until one of my letters gets through to you. I won't abandon you. We're connected. Your friend, Trevor.
A message on my phone from one of my coworkers at the deli. Linda. Tickets for the Hammerjacks Festival next week. So excited. You're coming. On me. Can't cry poor. I ran my hand through my hair, then gripped it in a fist. That was a 2-day festival, up where she lived in Fremont, 20 miles away. She'd expect me to spend the night. I'd missed the mail for a day. I texted her back. Can't. Sorry. We'll explain tomorrow. I'd think of something by then. I held up Trevor's letter, brushing away tears. Stop it, I whispered, as though he could hear me. Please, stop it. And that wasn't the last either. Far from it. For the next couple of weeks, I heard from him practically every other day. I told myself that this was his final frenzy, that this must all end, and soon. The words on the page kept whispering to me, taunting me, painting my vision red, the color of life and death. We're connected, he said over and over again. And soon, it would be our special day. Trevor was conscientious enough to remember it. December 23rd, 2015.
Dear Mercy, do you know what today is? It's our anniversary. The anniversary of the first letter you sent me. It's faded now. I've looked at it so many times, handled it so much that the ink is smeared and faded. But I still have your picture. I'm very careful with your picture. I don't let anything bad happen to it. But back to the topic at hand. Our anniversary. I haven't heard from you in months. but I know you're thinking of me today. I just know it. I can feel you in my bones. It's electric. The bonds that bind us together. You feel it too, right? Our special connection. Tell me you're thinking of me. Happy New Year. Hope to hear from you soon. Trevor.
I put out the cigarette. I was tempted to burn myself with it. Wouldn't have been the first time. No, I said to myself, you're done with that shit. All of it. You haven't done stupid shit like that since you were a kid. But then, I hadn't smoked cigarettes in more than a year either. And here I was, smoking. I hoped Mom wouldn't smell it. That was the last thing I needed. This is it, I thought, and repeated it to myself several times with my eyes shut tight. When I don't answer him on our anniversary, he'll get it. He'll take the point. This is it. This is it. For 2 months, I dared to hope that it was. February 27th, 2016.
Dear Mercy, have I done something to offend you, sweetheart? Why would you treat me this way? By now, I'm sure at least one of my letters has reached you. I've sent dozens, maybe more. Your whore of a mom couldn't have caught all of them, so why aren't you answering? I miss you. Your friend, Trevor.
Into the drawer the letter went. Out came the textbooks. On came the computer. I breathed a sigh of relief as the machine booted up. Finally, he gets it. It was the best thing that could have happened. Better even than never hearing from him again. This time, for once, he acknowledged that I had deliberately cut him off. Took him long enough. As I commenced hacking my way through pages and pages of research on evolving theory on abnormal psychology, I felt an unexpected twinge of guilt. Trevor Walker was a criminal, a killer. But it had originally been me, not him, who had reached out for a friend. I hadn't even had the guts to tell him I was done. This could have been over long ago. And through it all, he cared enough about me to keep our letters secret. If he had told anyone, I knew, then sooner or later, everyone would have found out. I felt bad for him, but not bad enough to write back. I figured he had one more letter left in him, tops. But I was wrong. He had 2. March 19th, 2016.
Dear Mercy, in all the time we've been corresponding, you never once asked me what happened that night. I'm sure you must want to know. I can't blame you. I understand. Well, sweetheart, I think you deserve to know the true story. I owe you that much. It was 1986, and I was taking a stroll after dark. As I walked by the woods, I saw something strange, something I still can't properly describe to this day. In the darkness, I saw something even darker. Something that seemed to absorb even the dimmest of light. A kind of shadow in the shadows. I could only make out its presence from the absence of things around it. This strange moving shadow shifted towards me as though liquid and solid all at once. I was frozen in fear. Couldn't move, couldn't run, couldn't scream. The shadow slithered into me, and suddenly I felt a rush of adrenaline. My body started moving on its own. You know, after all these years, I've always maintained my innocence. And this is why. I wasn't in control that night. I was just a puppet. That thing, that shadow, it pulled me by unseen strings, forced me to do those heinous things. I couldn't stop myself. There was no way to resist him. He made me steal that truck, made me throw those women into the back, made me force myself on them, made me watch as my hands squeezed the life out of them. I had to watch. Oh God, I had to watch as the light faded from their eyes and felt their bodies turn cold. I had to throw them into the ditch and hunt for the next. But after the third woman, I managed to restrain him. I sat on the hood of that truck and waited for the police to find and arrest me. That was my choice. What I did to those women wasn't. Now that you know the truth, will you respond to me? I miss you. Your friend, Trevor.
This, I said out loud, looking at the letter over again for a third time, is out of control. I know what you're thinking. You're thinking this would be the moment when a normal person would say to herself, "Hey, you know what? Your pen pal is a fucking lunatic who blames his psychosis on demonic possession and believes he just used you as his confessor." A normal person, an adult, would have understood that there was information in that letter that the police might want. And you'd be right to think that. Even if all the other letters leading up to this one could have been filed in a drawer labeled my own personal bullshit, I could not do that with this one. Not with a clean conscience. If I didn't turn that letter in, I might even be guilty of withholding or something. But Trevor Walker was still in jail. He'd been sentenced to life without possibility of parole. And in this state, that actually means something. He was surrounded by brick and bars and razor wire and shotguns. If he tried anything, there wasn't a cop anywhere on Earth that would hesitate. They'd blow his fucking brains out. And I was in too deep. I had collected over 50 letters from this monster and had done nothing with them. I'd be hounded everywhere I went. I'd have to move, change my identity, hit the reset button on my life yet again. I had friends. I was normal. Things weren't even that bad with Mom anymore. So go ahead and say it. I won't argue. I was an idiot. I let the sleeping dog lie. It wasn't long, of course, before the sleeping dog woke up. July 2nd, 2016.
Dear Mercy, I gave you a chance, Mercy. I gave you all the time in the world to reply to me. Why didn't you reply to me? Are you afraid of me? Don't you believe my story? Have you lost faith in me? In us? What they say in the news ain't right, you know. I grew up normal. A normal boy in a normal God-fearing household in the outskirts of Montana. They tell my story the way they want to tell my story. Make things up to make me sound like some kind of bloodthirsty animal capable of nothing but inflicting pain. They never understood me. They changed my story to fit their agendas, to come up with a fake little explanation as to why I was the way I was, because the lie made more sense than the truth I told. Made more sense than knowing that demons are out there, that the devil is real, that I was just a puppet. They said I tortured my pets as a kid. What a fucking crock. I never heard a damn animal in my life. Said I was a loner. Not true. I had plenty of friends. Not that any of them would admit to that now. But you would. You know how good of a friend I can be, Mercy. They made me out to be everything I wasn't. They spun their web of lies, made me out to be a monster. The joke's on them, though. I ain't no monster. I'm a savior. I'm rotting in this jail cell by choice. It's by my will, and my will alone, that this creature doesn't get back out into the world. I make sure that I stay in this cell right here where it can't escape. Don't you see? I let myself get caught on purpose. I wanted to protect the world, not from me, but from it. I keep the world safe. I keep you safe. But it wants out. I'm not sure I can hold it back anymore. You see? You and I, our strings have become intertwined. We're its puppets, entangled by fate. It wants to play with you, and I don't think I can fend it off any longer. I've protected you this long, but it wants out now, Mercy. It wants out. It wants you. I've read and reread your letters over and over again. You were very careful to leave your address out of our correspondences. Or maybe that was the jail. I don't know. All I know is that your letters always came in blank envelopes, but even though I received many blank envelopes, I always knew which were yours. I could smell yours, Mercy. They smelled like you, sweet like lavender. I sniffed them over and over until the scent dried out and was replaced by the stench of my jail cell. I think I look forward to that the most. Funny how much you underestimate scent until you wind up somewhere where everything smells the same. But yeah, you were careful. Or you tried to be. But you, or they, forgot one major detail. All the little things you've told me over the years that helped me track you down. The time you told me about the creek, the way you described your town, the terrain. Aren't you a sweetheart for giving me the name of your high school so I could track you down? Yeah, we know exactly where you live. See you soon, sweetheart.
That was it. His last letter. He must have written it during the day before the mail call or whatever they call it on the inside. Because that was also the night that he broke out. He'd been in maximum security, naturally. 1,000 brick-and-mortar layers of "you're fucked," separating him from the rest of society. But he got out anyway. Alone. No tunnels, no bodies. Nothing. By the time the letter arrived, I'd already been here for 2 days, along with Mom. She's still trying to process all of this. How could I have kept it a secret from her for so long? It's no secret that she doesn't think I'm all that clever. No more than you do. And I won't judge you for that. I've done what you asked me to do. I've spent hours typing all this shit out. It's everything I can remember about my letters to Trevor and his letters to me. Hope it does some good. One of the hardest things for me to get my head around, just now, as I sit at this computer at the clerk's office in the police station, is the realization that Trevor Walker was not my father's friend. The man in the picture with Dad was not the Trevor Walker I just saw on television. They're nothing alike. I suppose I should not be too surprised. Turns out the man in the photograph is some guy named Pete Duggar, and he'd been busted with my dad after the convenience store robbery. I now realize that when my father had written, "Getting to know wonderful people like Trevor Walker," he was being sarcastic. I mean, if they had been so wonderful together, why would Trevor have killed him in the cafeteria that day? I suppose I should be grateful. I'm surrounded by more than half the cops in town, and most of the other half are out looking for him. I am as safe as I can be. But Trevor is out there looking too. Looking for me. And I'm certain he was truthful about that much. And that's not even the worst thing. That's not why I'm so scared. I know my mother and I'll remain in protective custody for a good long time. Or until you catch him. And I hope you do. No. The thing that bothers me is the possibility that everything Trevor Walker said about his original crimes was actually true. I mean, impossible as that is. It sure would explain the jailbreak. And no one else seems to be able to do that. If people are so willing to believe in God without evidence, based only on faith, then how hard is it to imagine that the devil, or his agents, walk among us as well? If they do, you won't be able to save me. No one will. He'll probably kill my mother as well. And it'll be my fault. Because I didn't help Trevor keep the devil at bay.
It was everything about the sea that had always unnerved him, waiting at the bottom in one cold, disintegrating hulk. Not 2 minutes earlier, Danny was in another world, the world above the waves, the world of air and land and the hot, dry feel of the summer sun. His wetsuit snug as a second skin, he sat on the cuddy boat's transom long enough to velcro a lanyard around his ankle, binding him to the safety line with 90 feet of slack. He cinched tight his goggles, round and insectoid, then slipped over the stern. Bobbing in sync with the hull, he sucked wind and huffed it out, cycling a few times before filling from the bottom up, belly, lower chest, upper chest, like trying to cram a stuffed suitcase with more and a little more on top of that. In the boat, against the lone cloud in the sky, Chemo held a stopwatch with his thumb on the trigger. Ready? Then he squeezed in one last sip of air and plunged head first, like a seal, full body undulations propelling him down, with the safety line trailing after. The swim fins helped. He'd not been blessed with big feet. They never made fun in Hawaii, but guys always made fun here on the mainland. Hey, Danny, with those dainty little Asian paws of yours, how do you manage to even stay up on a surfboard? Well, maybe they didn't mean anything by it. Or maybe they did, trying to get inside his head, psych him out. Small feet. Small. Yeah. He converted it to fuel. That much more drive to bring home a trophy, another sponsorship. But all that was a world away. He was in the blue world now, a gradient of cerulean to indigo yawning beneath him, where the farther down you went, the more the topside laws unraveled. Until he'd first experienced the shift for himself back in the spring, he had always believed the same as everyone else he brought it up with, that freediving was a non-stop struggle against your own buoyancy, fighting the lift of the air heaved into your lungs. Another misconception dies hard. It was like that for only the first 40 or so feet down. Make it that far, to what they called the doorway to the deep. And there came a transition he had yet to stop regarding with wonder. Buoyancy was neutralized, the weight of the water bearing down, nullifying your tendency to rise to the surface. No more struggle. The fight was won. The sea had you then, a downward pull he could feel tugging on his shoulders and skull. He held his arms along his sides, aquadynamic, and continued to descend, effortlessly now, like a skydiver, bulleting in freefall. The trickiest part had been learning how to equalize the pressure on his ears, in his sinuses, and turn back the pain. The deeper he sank, the more the pressure became like the slow tightening of a fist that would never relax. It had taken some reframing of the changes it made, seeing them as comforting rather than distressing. This is what happens down here. This is normal. Another version of normal. No big deal. Just the mammalian dive reflex. Shifts of physiology so distinct, so foreign out of the water, so automatic in it. They could recalibrate a lifetime of thinking after a dive or two. Maybe we really do belong here. Despite the exertion, his heart rate slowed. Even before the threshold 40 feet down, his lungs were already compressed to half their normal size. At 60, they were reduced to a third. If he were acclimated enough to go that far, at 300 feet, his lungs would be no bigger than baseballs. Here, though, a couple miles out to sea, over a shelf of land jutting from the central Oregon coast, the bottom cut him off at a depth of 76. Almost there. He tucked into a ball and flipped head over tail, to finish dropping flippers first. He tucked down with a gentle bounce that stirred the silt amid a sparse garden of kelp and seaweed that swayed in the current. And all was so very quiet, like awakening to a dream world of slow time and profound tranquility. The need to breathe remained on some far horizon. The pressure was a cocoon, a presence as welcoming as a hug. All this time he'd been lying to himself, thinking he knew something about the ocean. And why? Because he'd grown up on an island? because he'd first stepped onto a surfboard when he was 7 and had hardly stepped off since. That was how you fooled yourself into believing you truly understood the sea when all you'd ever done on a board was scratch the water's surface. Above, the day was clear, bright and sunny. Down here, the sun still found him, but was filtered to a murky twilight, as if the fog of morning and blue of evening had joined to wrap around and welcome him home. It took slow moments to take shape. A mass off to his left, a ragged, edgeless hill rising from the sea floor. Danny moved toward it in fin-encumbered hops, a feeling maybe like walking on the moon. He hadn't gotten close enough to satisfy his curiosity before his tether to the surface ran out of slack. The dumbest thing in the world would be to strip the lanyard from his ankle. He did it anyway, fearing if he didn't get close enough for a look now, he might never find the spot again. He left the safety line behind and was truly diving free. The mass was no longer edgeless, and no hill. A hill wouldn't have 2 masts jutting down from one side to dig into the sea floor. A hill wouldn't have rectangular openings, nor broken windows, metal railings, cleats still wrapped with decaying rope. It was somebody's lost sailing yacht, a 50-footer at minimum, resting on its starboard side. The build was old school, lots of wood where most buyers would have been content with aluminum and fiberglass. Now, it was an ecosystem, submerged long enough to have sagged into itself and crushed over with rot and life. The cold found him through his wetsuit and went for his marrow. Shipwrecks had always bothered him, even from the safety of pictures. Planes lost at sea, too, and sunken cars, and houses and timber groves and valleys flooded to make new lakes. It was more than the tragedies and calamities they told of. It was their status, things perfectly normal in the topside world. Aliens now, lost and alone, where they were never meant to be. They were a rebuttal. You're lying to yourself, you know? It's the hypoxia talking. You think you belong. This isn't your element at all. Regardless, the wreck drew him in until he was close enough to touch it. Everything down here is so much better suited to belong than you. Here, all you are is a resource. Breathing? Soon. The pent-up need he now understood wasn't driven by a lack of oxygen. The body had no sensors for that. An amazing oversight. Nobody would ever design an oxygen-powered machine that way on purpose. Down here, your food. All you have to do is wait. Instead, the clawing need to breathe came from a buildup of carbon dioxide, and you could hack that to a degree. He let a poof of stale air slip his lips, and it bought him a little more time. He squatted and gripped the yacht's tilted gunwale to shove off it and launch his ascent. But to his surprise, it gave way with a muffled crunch, and a cloud of debris, crumbs and shards of rotten wood drifting loose. It was what was inside that really gave him a jolt. The cross-section of wood appeared tunneled, the burrows full of soft, pale bodies. Worms, they looked like. Some as short and thin as matches, others the size of a finger, one as plump as a cigar. Danny vented more CO2, this time not meaning to, a sound of disgust burping loose, and he'd been down too long, his vision starting to close around the edges with the height of a 7-story building left to swim. He pushed off the bottom and kicked toward the beckoning daylight. If your vision began turning to a haze they called the pink cloud, that was when you really had to worry. What came next was a blackout, and he feared it was moments away. The resetting of the clock to a final countdown. You could drift unconscious for a couple minutes, no harm done, your larynx automatically closing like a valve to keep the water out. Up top, they would know before it opened again, if they were paying attention. You just had to trust your team. They'd realize you were in trouble, haul you up by your safety line. Oh. Right, shit. He kicked harder, Which came first then? The movement out in front of him? Or the movement he felt through him? Through, probably. Yeah, go with that. His insides felt stirred, quivering as if he'd hugged a vibrator. Right away he knew what it was. He'd felt the same thing from dolphins. Echolocation. A ping of sonar developed over millions of years of evolution. So advanced it made the Navy's best look like a toy. But this was no dolphin. If a dolphin was a whisper, what he'd felt was a bark. He lowered his gaze from the beacon of the sun and back to the deep blue haze. 20, 30 yards out it was dimly visible, a darker bulk against the murk, a slick, bulbous head and a body stretching too far back into the gloom to make out. With his vision closing down, Danny could barely see it anyway, and only for a moment before it faded into a wash of pink. He heard a muffled thump and the sensation enveloped him again. If you're lucky and you know it, clap your hands. Whatever was out there could have obliterated him without trying. Sperm whales? Loudest animals on Earth. Their clicks could be so loud they couldn't even exist in the air as sound. They could blow out your eardrums, maybe kill you as surely as the concussive blast of a bomb. Lucky, it was only scanning, giving him a sonogram. Kicking again with legs starting to feel like tingling rubber, nearly blind now, he rose toward a total eclipse of the sun. A few feet from the surface he spewed a gush of bubbles to empty his aching lungs. Then, with a titanic whoosh, broke through into the glorious air. "You stupid motherfucker!" Kimo was peering down from the boat as if he were looking at a ghost. Things started going clear again, even the sweat spraying from Kimo's shaved head as he whipped the lanyard at the end of the rope, like shaking a leash at a naughty dog. "What is this? What the fuck is this?" My bad? Didn't quite cut it under the circumstances, did it? What? Almost drowning once this year wasn't enough for you? You thought you'd find another way? Treading water, Danny peeled off his goggles and flipped his hair back from his face to splat against his shoulders. "Sorry, man. I needed more than 90 feet. But you stopped moving." Kimo jabbed a finger toward the sonar screen. "It still makes you dumb as a rock, but if you kept moving, you wouldn't have sent me from 0 to panic mode, hauling this up, and you're not on the end of it anymore." He flung the safety line to the deck. "I was 2 seconds from going in after you." "But I started moving again." "Obviously. You didn't see that?" "I'm giving myself 90 feet of rope burns." "No. I don't multitask." The man had been looking out for him for years, one displaced Hawaiian to another, and his anger was so pure, so righteous, so Kimo. Danny couldn't help but laugh. It was the right thing at the right time, same as below, the body knowing what to do, and doing it. "I was fine, really." He took Kimo's hand and clambered over the side into the boat, then tapped the sonar. "How about the whale? You see the whale?" For a moment, Kimo could only blink. Translation? "Good going, asshole. Now you made me miss an entire whale, too." "You saw a whale?" "Just for a second or two. My vision was going, so..." "Are you sure you weren't hallucinating?" "I felt him check me out. I didn't hallucinate that." He turned a clumsy 360 to scan the waves for a breach, but saw nothing. "How long was I down?" I think you were around 245. 250 when I went for the line. I don't even know where the watch landed." Danny plopped onto the transom and wriggled out of his fins. "So I had to break 3 minutes, easy. Nothing impressive by competition standards. Competitive freedivers could rack up depths and times that were off the chain. But those people were all about the numbers. The endurance. Not about merging with the sea. A new personal best and I don't even know what it is." He tossed his fins aside, then spotted the stopwatch beside their cooler of water bottles. He snatched it up and held it toward Kimo's face. Back to normal brown after all the furious brick red. "Check it," Danny said. 6:34 and counting. Kimo rolled his eyes. "That'll look good on your tombstone. Still holding my breath, bitches." Shipworms. That's all you saw when the wood came apart. Gale told him that afternoon. They're called shipworms. Danny didn't know whether to be fascinated or appalled. A whale? He could wrap his brain around that. Those aquatic grubs were something new. Shipworms? It's actually a thing? For someone who's eaten as many waves as you have, your sense of maritime history really is lacking. She gave him a peck on the cheek, as if to say she loved him anyway. Yeah, they're a thing. In the age of sailing ships before steel hulls, they were a big, bad, serious thing. Termites of the sea is the best way to describe them. If they weren't busy eating shipwrecks, they were causing them, or chewing through wharves, piers, anything like that, waiting for a nice juicy log to drift by to turn into a floating condo. Your home is your food, pretty much the definition of a parasite. Like taking a gander around this cliff-top cottage and thinking, hey, break me off a piece of that wall. I'm feeling peckish. What am I in the mood for? The green room? The blue room? Something in the line of a honey gold breakfast nook. Yum. But they're not actually worms. They're mollusks, like long skinny oysters. They've got little shells on the front. That's how they burrow in. She perked up. If you dive that wreck again, bring up a few. They're supposed to taste like clams. That's a bucket of nope right there. His stomach did barrel rolls at the thought. How do you know this? You don't even sail. That was the distinction between them. For all her astonishing symbiosis with the sea, Gale hardly ever got out on it. That was his department. Gale was perfectly happy being its next-door neighbor. She crossed her arms and, with a cockeyed grin, withered him with a glance. He knew how to translate that look. Come with me, you fool. With a swirl of her skirt, she led him out of the cottage and across the stone path to the outbuilding. Her workshop, bright and airy and open to clear out the smell of varnish. Its walls were the color of sea foam. Its windows faced a panoramic view of the Pacific. And it was always full of driftwood. Most of the pieces were still raw, just as they had been harvested from the beach. The rest were in various stages of processing and transformation. Every chunk she brought in was its own starter kit. Anything from simple projects like necklace racks to elaborate constructions like lampstands and chandeliers that she sold to galleries from Portland to Santa Barbara. Last year, she'd taken hundreds of seemingly useless fragments and, or anyone else might have seen only kindling, turned them into a mosaic of a whimsical octopus with spiral seashells for eyes. Gale snatched up a sun-bleached branch the length of his arm, peppered with perforations as if someone had used it for target practice. After almost 20 years of seeing me do this, you never wondered where these holes come from. I guess I thought it was weathering. By her skeptical look, she wasn't buying it. Okay, I guess I never thought about it at all. She gave him one of those shakes of her head, playful but dismissive, that left him feeling she had so much more wisdom than he did, baked in from birth. If it doesn't eat the surfboard out from under you, it doesn't exist, right? Pretty much, he conceded. As a rule, ignorance was no virtue, but if you gave too much thought to the sea, and everything with teeth and called it home, you'd never venture out to meet it. Maybe that was why she stayed on shore. They grilled on the patio that evening, marinated tempeh and vegetables, and as they usually did unless the rain had other ideas, carried their plates out to the wrought iron table on the little redwood deck so they could eat beneath the sky, facing the sea. The cottage was one of a haphazard nest of 6, perched near the edge of a 200-foot cliff overlooking the beach and breakers below. Bellies full, they kicked their feet up on the brick retaining wall around the fire pit and passed the evening's joint back and forth. Danny wanted to say he liked it better living at the condo in Santa Monica, and Gale liked it better here, but that wasn't true. Santa Monica was only more convenient. He liked it better here too. Time passed differently here, the days longer, the seasons more pronounced. On the luckiest nights, he might awaken to the faraway squeal of a passing whale. Humpback, he supposed. The only kind he was aware of whose songs carried above water. He would roll over to find that Gail was already up, her silhouette framed by the bedroom window, where she sat as still as stone and listened for as long as it would last. They never got that in Santa Monica. Although she was never farther away from him than she was in those minutes, lost inside a trance, and there was little he could do to get her back but wait. Anyway, that with it, he'd been meaning to bring it up for months. Now, felt as right as ever. I'm gonna have to find a business to go into, or invent. Telling the water, but for Gail's ears. Any suggestions? She looked more concerned with diagnosing causes. Is it the fear? Well, that wasn't it, but it made sense she would go there. They'd have to give the topic a couple of airings after his wipeout this spring at Preveley Park. The bigger the wave, the more ways a ride could go wrong. Miscalculations, human error, the never-predictable hydraulics of any given wave. However it happened, things went wrong. While you went shooting through the tube, the board got sucked up the wall of water curling over behind you, while the wave rose up while the bottom dropped out, and you got slammed into the impact zone. You were no longer riding the wave. It was riding you, maybe grinding you into the sand and rocks that really teach you a lesson. He knew no greater helplessness than that. Being held under by the first wave was terror enough. If you were still down when the next one came crashing in, you felt exponentially worse, battered and exhausted and desperate to breathe. Still hadn't surfaced before a third one came along. That was when it seemed as though the ocean had made up its unfathomable mind. It wasn't letting go. He'd known a couple guys who hadn't come up alive, but he had. No idea how, but after a 3-wave hold-down at Preveley Park, he had. The ocean doesn't want me today. It was as good an explanation as any. But one day it might. It was the reason he'd taken up freediving, to extend his breath-holding duration, to get comfortable with being under the water a long time, because as a surfer, under was the last place anyone wanted to be. And it had helped. He felt recalibrated, more at peace with under than ever. So no, this had nothing to do with fear. It's worse, he said. It's the calendar and the numbers. Gail had been holding back a toke and lost it with a hacking laugh. I thought it would be at least another 20 years before maybe I'd hear you make a concession there. She fixed him with a hazy leer. Who are you, foul thing that crawled from the sea? And give me back my Danny. Which version? He was developing a nostalgic longing for the Danny Yukimura who seemed incapable of thinking about consequences. Gail rubbed his arm. It's just another birthday with a 0. Don't you know? 40 is the new 18. I think it's what it's down to. Well, that only helps if 18 is the new as yet unborn. He took the joint, made it smolder, handed it back. It's the rankings. In the top 30 in the world, I've had a good run. But I've never gotten higher than 22, and now I'm right back on the edge. The only place to go is down. That's how this goes. Especially now. It was the times. Thrilling to be around to witness them, but shitty when you were a casualty because you couldn't keep up. People were out there doing amazing things, unthinkable things, feats that had been considered impossible. There's something changing in the world. He traced it back to when Laird Hamilton had caught that millennium wave in Tirhupwo. Until then, nobody had ridden a 60-foot wave. Nobody. It wasn't merely the height, it was the length, the girth, the colossal magnitude. Even Hamilton hadn't been planning on it. He got towed into the wave, then it rose a behemoth. As the tube collapsed behind him, everybody watching thought he was dead, until he came shooting up out of the spray. A thing like that did something magical. It opened a doorway to unknown realms of potential. 80-footers, 90-footers. Guys were riding them now. It wasn't only surfers either. Skateboarders, skiers, snowboarders, superhumans were popping up everywhere. Somebody does something that blows minds around the globe and everyone says, "Damn, dude, that record's gonna stand for years." Then it doesn't even stand a season. Something in the air, maybe. Something in the water. He loved seeing it unfold in the world. It was a beautiful time to be alive, but it wasn't his arena anymore. He couldn't compete with that. Go big or go home. He was home. He just had no idea what to do next. "So you launch your own line of boards or gear or both," Yale said. "Or you open up the Danny Ukumura School of Surfing and turn into one of those cute old guys with the long white hair and wispy beard, but still badass, and wait for people to come to you. Because they will." He wanted to believe. Yale made it easy to believe, even if he still ached for more and had no idea what it was. Before the dawn, even before coffee, they made their way along the stairs that zigzagged down a cleft in the land from cliff top to sea level. The wooden steps were perpetually damp, even in summer, crowded over by trees so that the sun never reached them. They nearly always had the shore to themselves when beach walking this early, sharing it with at most a neighbor from above, out with a dog and a stick. He knew of no place where dawn was more different from dusk than here, with the sun on the other side of the continent, behind a 200-foot wall of rock and earth. Here, dawns were gradual and gray, a time of mist and fog. This morning, the wind was up, sending ribbons of fine, dry sand skimming over the damp, packed plains of the beach. The surf rolled and pounded behind a veil, as if the sand were of one world and the water of another, and every sunrise it took the proper spell to bring them back together. They wouldn't be going home empty-handed. They never did. The only variable was what Gale would find, and how long it would take after she shook his hand and went on the hunt. He'd never met anyone more suited to spend her life seaside, not merely to live here, but thrive. She smelled of the sea, tasted of it. Even the ocean knew its own. The sea had recognized this about her as soon as Gale arrived for good, a couple years before they'd met. She had grown up Midwestern, landlocked in every direction, but the farthest shores had always called her from as early a time as she could remember. A week after her 18th birthday, she made the 1,500-mile trek west, one way this time. A week after that, one morning's beach walk set her up for years, when she came upon what appeared to be a peculiar yellowish rock, stone-like, yet waxy, embedded in the sand. Right away, she'd known it for what it really was. Ambergris, a solidified lump of secretions from the belly of a sperm whale, nearly 3 pounds of it. No substance on earth was more prized by the makers of perfume, especially in France. It was illegal to sell in the States, though, so one impromptu trip to Canada later, she returned 3 pounds lighter, $140,000 heavier, and after making the down payment on the cottage, had hardly left the ocean side ever since. Such a find had to be more than dumb luck. Yale had taken it not merely as a welcome, but as a blessing. You're where you belong now. This is your home. It's always been your home. You just had to find your way back. The sea never stopped giving to her. Danny had never seen anything like it, the sheer reliability of it. Some days the swells didn't want to be surfed, and you had to accept that. But Gale and her walks along the shore, harvesting the ocean's cast-offs, she always came back with something, and the desires to see what she could make of it sent her out beachcombing with 10 other people, and there was a good chance she'd come back with more treasure than everyone else combined. He imagined salt-encrusted nymphs out in the surf, working on her behalf. Look alive, mateys. It's her again. Heave to. This morning, the farther north they walked, the lighter the dawn became, as ahead of them, Neptune's throne took shape out of the gray haze. Neptune's throne was all he'd ever heard anyone call it. It was an observation platform for surfers to watch the incoming, but whoever had built it hadn't made it particularly convenient. It was 4 solid tree trunk pillars driven deep into the sand, braced with crossbeams and supporting a planked deck just above head height. No steps. If you wanted to clamber onto it, you had to have either the upper body strength to pull yourself up, or friends to push you from below. It had a back like a gargantuan chair, a windbreak, he assumed, blocking what the cliffs didn't. 2 of the trunks joined above the platform with an X, which in turn supported a row of ragged planks that were shortest on the outside and rose to an imperial peak in the middle. The deck was usually thatched, and at first glance the bristly edges gave it the look of something that belonged somewhere tropical. Kimo recalled more of Hawaii than he did, and said the thing reminded him of rough-hewn structures he'd seen in places tourists didn't get to, burial platforms, and shrines where fishermen laid offerings to the gods of the sea before heading out, or after rowing back in with their catch. Keep looking at it though, and the tropical impression faded, darkened. Danny wasn't sure why. Maybe it was the way the 2 front trunks topped out with the flare stumps of long-gone limbs as thick as the trunks themselves. Neither appeared shaped by hand, only weathered, yet each had the look of a skull that faced the sea, like the bones of a pair of malformed whales. Who had first built the thing and when? Questions no one could answer. If their neighbor Felicia was to be believed, Neptune's throne was older than he was, and her as well. Felicia had lived atop the cliff for 50 years, and claimed the structure was there when she and her husband moved in. Claimed as well she'd seen a photo dated decades earlier from the time of the Great Depression, and it was standing then too, meaning none of today's throne could have been the original wood. It was too well maintained to have withstood over 80 years of weathering. But in the years he and Gail had been dividing their time between here and Santa Monica, he'd never seen anyone repair it, only use it. When they passed by, Gail patted one of the gray weathered anchor posts as if it were the leg of a friendly elephant. He lingered, fingertips tracing the little holes along the wood. He knew what they were now, but wasn't pleased about that. As if there were a chance he could probe far enough inside to find a tangle of worms that had learned how to live outside the sea. In their present direction, north, they were nearing their terminus, where a point of land fit for a lighthouse curved around from the right and speared out into the waves. At the base of the wall ran a stream fed by tributaries that trickled down the hillsides, then joined and cut ever-changing channels in the sand before emptying into the sea. It was here she found it, a still wet chunk of driftwood the size of a truncated log, mired in the sand of a delta that might not be here tomorrow morning, erased by the tide and recut somewhere else. Gail knelt. She scraped off sand and picked away rags of seaweed. "You want to do the honors, my strong guy?" Danny wrestled it free of the beach's hold and stood it on end. It was lighter than it looked, would be lighter still after it dried. Regardless, he didn't relish the thought of lugging it 200 feet up slick wooden stairs. "Wow," she said after she had a longer look. "If I didn't know better, and maybe I don't, I'd say this was something that had already been carved." They traded places, Gail holding it up while he stepped back for a view. She was right. It had a suggestion of form. Human, or maybe he was biased that way. Still, working with the contours and curves of what remained, he could discern legs pressed together and thickening into hips, a waist and sloping shoulders, a head. It would be unrecognizable without a head. The figurehead of a ship's prow, maybe? He recalled yesterday's yacht, being gnawed to slivers on the ocean floor. Maybe not that boat in particular, a straight chunk of someone else's bad luck. The ocean was forever digesting the remains of bad luck and coughing up the pieces. A lot of figureheads were big-breasted women, traditionally speaking. Beside it, Gail went ramrod straight and perked up her chest, comparing. If I squint just right, I can make out a couple boobs. She looked him in the eye, squinty. And if you say, but what about the wood, I will murder you in your sleep. She had him call heads or tails. Then they took their places at either end and began to shuffle the thing home. 2 days later, she found another one washed up half a mile to the south. Longer by a few inches, but shaped almost identically. 2 half-rotted figureheads on the same beach at the same time? Not likely. By now, he was leaning toward dismissing it as a case of pareidolia, the tendency to see ships in clouds, the man in the moon, and Jesus on a burnt tortilla, or making a face out of 2 holes, a bump, and a line. Even so, lugging them home felt like carrying corpses, complete with grave worms. The sodden outer wood sloughed and squished in its uncertain grip. Halfway up the cliff with the second one, his fingers broke through as if piercing a crust, and pulped an embedded shipworm as thick as a sausage. He nearly dropped the log and went down with it. The stairs were damp underfoot and slick with wet flora, treacherous for carrying this kind of load. When Gale found the third one a few days later, he had no idea what to make of it. If pareidolia was simple pattern recognition, okay then, what sort of pattern was this? On the surface, it seemed the same old relationship Gale had always had with the sea and the generosity of its tides, but it had never given her the same exact thing time after time. If it was going to do that, why not be really generous and keep lobbing more lumps of ambergris at her? She first left her finds outside on heavy racks to dry in the July sun, turning them every few hours like hot dogs in a grill. Then, she moved them into her workshop, lined them against one wall, standing in a row. They turned pale now that they were dry, bleached by the elements and time. With the muck wiped off and the water bloat gone, finer details emerged. The pieces all tapered and thickened the same way, with dual concavities that suggested eyes, and a note that suggested a nose, and a crack against the grain for a mouth. They were just humanoid enough that Danny didn't like turning his back on them, as if they were shells that would break open and release some worse form gestating inside. Gotta be a simple explanation, Chemo told him on the boat while out on another free-diving trip. Maybe there's something that fell off a cargo ship. Some shipment of carvings that weren't very good to begin with. Or there's some asshole out here who lives on a boat, thinks he's an artist, more money than talent, and dumps his mistakes overboard when nothing turns out the way he wants. Whatever they are, not that they're washing up, they look that much worse. Incompetent artists, Danny said. Really? That's your explanation? If you had a better one, you wouldn't have asked me what I thought. Point taken. But the wobble in this theory was that nothing about any of these pieces appeared to have been carved. Danny had looked, then closely. No evidence of chisels, rasps, scrapers, draw knives. They showed no signs of hand tooling at all. Even the ends looked broken, not sawed. What was the likelihood that someone who couldn't turn out a carving that looked more than vaguely human was, nevertheless, skilled enough to keep everything smooth, free of facets? Erosion, where? Chemo said. You ever see a jagged stone in a riverbed? Not me. Pick any rock. You don't know how it looked when it went in. You're just getting what's left. And when Gale found another, number 4, but it was counting, Danny wasn't even surprised. Well, yes, he was, not by the find, but by the irritation he felt at the news. How many of these things did she need anyway? Just because they washed up, did that obligate her to accept every single one? Bring them all home? It wasn't like him to be resentful. But analyze it anyway. Things hadn't merely come easily for Gale. They came effortlessly. The ocean gave, and never ran out. All she had to do was show up and take possession. He'd be lucky to be able to make a decent living doing something he loved, but it had never come easily. It had taken thousands of hours of wave time to hone his skills. It had taken near drownings, lacerations from coral, jellyfish stings, reef rash, a staph infection, various sprains, 2 separate concussions when the board smacked him in the head. And that was before factoring in every competitor on the tours breathing down his neck, eager to take his ranking and sponsorships for themselves. Worst of all, it was life with an expiration date. He couldn't keep doing it forever, and he was nearly there. He could feel the downward pull as surely as he felt it during a dive, after entering the doorway to the deep. Gale, though, went on as ever, bringing up trinkets as though she were being wooed by the sea, the same sea that she claimed to love, but wouldn't go out on, not even with him. As she began to spend more hours in her workshop than ever, he wondered if it was karmic payback. If this was what it had been like for her over 2 decades, forced to share him with a passion that consumed him, sent him around the world to wherever the waves were at their biggest and baddest. From Mavericks to Waimea Bay, from Tavarua to Padong. Maybe that was the part that hadn't come easily for her. But by the time the 5th figure turned up, even Gale seemed past taking any joy in it. Something about this was not right. It had never been quite right. This feels like a cat sometimes, bringing you its kills, she confessed in the workshop one evening. At the bank of windows, the sun dropped boiling red into the cauldron of the sea. It loves you, but it's love on a whole different wavelength. He had no idea what to say to that. Along the north wall, the carvings seemed to be daring him to try. He was beginning to hate them. Whatever secret they knew, they weren't telling. At the center of the shop, a rectangular work table, as stout and sturdy as a stage, held half a dozen pieces of driftwood in various stages of transformation. Sculptures and a bonsai planter, none of which had progressed in 3 days. All Gale did now was come out and sit with them, seemingly stymied by the new arrivals that were piling up, as if they'd come to tell her that her work was at an end. Her methods hadn't changed in all the time he'd loved her, across 19 years of being together, 17 of marriage. Each piece of driftwood she harvested merited its own staring contest, a still, silent interrogation during which she divined what it wanted to be, needed to be, in its new and resurrected life. But these unblinking humanoids, Gale was treating them as if they were complete already, and no need of refinement. They didn't seem to be going anywhere. Like her, they were home. You know, we've done the seaside thing for more than half of our lives, he said. If I'll be retiring soon anyway, maybe we should give mountains a try. She almost laughed. Lie awake at night listening for elk? I don't know if that would work or not. She turned at the window and faced the rolling waters. He followed her gaze in case there was something to see, but if there was, only Gale could see it. Did you ever hear about the 52 Hertz whale? She said. He had not. It's the saddest thing ever. Researchers have been picking it up on hydrophones for years. It's only ever been heard, never seen. She was facing the window as if telling the ocean, and he was just around to eavesdrop. This whale, this one single whale that sings at a higher frequency than all the others, 52 hertz. All the usual suspects, blue whales, fin whales like that, they're down around 15 or 20 or 30. So nobody ever knows what kind of whale this is. All they know is that it just keeps roaming the Pacific, calling out, singing its song, and nothing else is answering. She turned her back to the window, facing him again. Better keep your mountains. I don't think I could handle that with an elk. They'll come right up in your front yard. He left her to it, all of it, the worm-eaten pieces of wood and the stalled magic she wielded over them, and traded the workshop for twilight. Out here on the grass, the 5th refugee carving remained wedged in its drying rack. Horizontal, it looked helpless. As he stepped closer, Danny wondered how she would react if he dragged it toward the setting sun and threw it off the cliff. He hadn't given this one a second look since it was cleaned off and mostly dry. What would have been the point? They were all the same, more or less. Except this one wasn't. He dared to touch it, to run his hand over what had been obscured before and was still barely visible. A faint impression scored around it, near the bottom end, like the groove of a finger after taking off a wedding ring, tattooed with a trace of rust. No way, he thought. This whole time, assuming these had started out as ordinary logs, when they were nothing of the sort. No way. The great thing about Chemo was that there was almost nothing he wouldn't drop at a moment's notice to take his boat out. He'd saved the GPS coordinates of the sunken yacht, so even after 3 weeks it was easy to find again. Once Danny was in the water, Chemo waved the coil of rope before tossing it over the side. "I'm giving you a longer leash, so leave it on. If you touch the lanyard this time, I'm going to break your arm." "Yes, Mom." Danny huffed wind to saturate himself, filled up, locked it in, then ducked and plunged. By now he'd been trading his frogman flippers for a monofin. Chemo called it his mermaid ass. It fit over both feet and forced his legs to move together, scything the water like a whale's flukes to turbocharge each kick. It made the hardest part of the dive easier, if no faster. He could equalize the pressure in his head only so quickly, but it took less energy to power downward, dolphin kicking, and to maneuver around once he got below neutral buoyancy, and that was what mattered. 76 feet down, the wreck waited in the hushed indigo haze, still tipped onto its starboard side with its mast jutting down into the ooze. And if the boat still unnerved him, helpless, disintegrating in a grave of silt and mud, it was at least familiar now. He knew it was pointless to check the prow for a figurehead, but felt compelled to do it anyway. And, of course, there was no evidence of one ever having been there. He turned onto his side and swam parallel to the sea floor, really mermaiding it now, cruising the length of the deck from bow to stern, inspecting the damage and the rot. He was gliding back the opposite way when it struck him. He'd been so focused on the small details that he had missed the big, obvious one right in front of him. He'd been looking for a hole ripped in the deck, or a broken stump, evidence of a missing mast. He'd been looking over what remained for signs of mast hoops, iron reinforcements especially, that might have chafed a groove of rust and wear around the bottom of its mast in the push and pull of the currents. And they were there. It was only when he took in the big picture that he realized, 3 weeks ago, the wreck had 2 masts, angled down toward the sediment. Now there was only one, the foremast. There appeared to have been 3 in total, masts detached from wrecked ships. Sure, it happened. But where were they now? No telling how long the rearward mizzen had been gone, but within the past 22 days, the mainmast shouldn't have gotten far. Shouldn't, but had. He feared he could guess where the 30-plus feet of them might have ended up. Where, but not how. There was no how he could imagine. There was no how he wanted to imagine. There was only his quickening heart and the hunger to breathe in the air above the waves. He surfaced and plunged again, like a pearl diver looking for a prize too big to be misplaced. He widened his search to the limits of his safety line, and still, it wasn't enough. Looking out toward deeper waters, beyond the spot where he caught that glimpse of the whale emerging through the dim blue, he saw how the seafloor sloped away, and that down the incline some indistinct patch of shadow waited. A trick of the light would waver. This didn't waver. "We need to move," he told Chemo the next time he surfaced. 40 or 50 yards that way. Never thought he'd see Chemo balk at piloting the boat. "Dude, you've had a month of downtime since the Corona Open. Is this really how you want to spend your final days of it? Instead of getting your mind on the Billabong Pro?" Treading water, spitting salt. "Yeah, it is. It helps. Everything helps. What's so special about 50 yards that way? Because I'm ready for it." Chemo made the move, grumbling, but insisted on doing a sonar reading of the bottom. 94 feet. Danny had never dived that far. Not a huge leap from last week's new personal best of 83, but still, it meant more pressure and another 22 feet of round trip. This was not insignificant. He went anyway. Deeper, bluer, colder, darker. He relaxed into the squeeze, welcoming it like an embrace. From above and to the side, he couldn't yet tell what was waiting below. Submerged another 18 feet lower than the yacht, even less light reached his target zone. But it was more than that. The water looked cloudier here, too. As his vision acclimated to the gloom, he could make out what appeared to be a slab on the sea floor, 3 times the width of a car, furred with growth and set in the midst of a forest of bull kelp. Their stalks swayed in the currents with their fronds wavering like pennants in a breeze. The further he sank, and the closer he drifted, the less natural the slab looked, like a mound of sand and mud and stones, scraped into a heap and packed together with intent. For no reason he wanted to explore, its flatness and order, its look of purpose, reminded him of the work table in Gale's shop. Again he was overcome with the uneasy sense of facing something out of place, lost from above, and drowned without pity. Because rising from the mound was a grove of logs, 8 of them, seemingly jammed into the muck to hold them in place. Their tops were ragged, splintered, a sight that nearly locked his mind. He could imagine no force in the sea that could take a ship's mast and break it up this orderly way, or would even want to. Around each piece, a thrashing cloud of motion churned and blurred the water. By now he knew a shipworm on sight. Even at their most normal, they still filled him with loathing. But he didn't think they were supposed to behave like this. Hundreds of them visible, like hagfish, burrowed into the side of a decomposing whale. They streamed over the wood with the furious energy of a feeding frenzy. The dread crept in cold from the outer dark. This was something no one was meant to see. Ever. A hiker would feel this way stumbling across the half-eaten carcass of a mule deer, then smelling the musk and carrion scent of the returning grizzly. Danny flicked his fin to drift close enough to see the hard little shells on the worms' heads, scoring the wood, shaping it as surely as rasps and chisels and lathes. He recognized the human form gnawed free from the lengths of mast. Anyone would. He knew their contours. He logged their predecessors up from the beach 5 times already. And among the 3 that appeared farthest along, he recognized the face, taking shape out of the grain. He had loved it for the past 19 years. Danny tried to will the sight away as an illusion born of low light and a brain hungry for oxygen, but it wouldn't resolve into anything else. He pinched off a half-dozen of the worms, fat and lashing, and flung them to the silt so he could caress his hand along the fresh-carved visage. Even blind, in the dark of an infinite abyss, he would know that cheekbone, that nose, that jawline, that hollow at the throat. Already the worms he'd dropped were wriggling back up to her face to dig back in and resume their tasks. Mindless, they seemed to obey a directive he couldn't begin to fathom. But if something out here was capable of snapping a ship's mast into pieces like a pencil, then maybe it followed that it had workers. Drones subjugated by the kind of group mind that turned a school of fish in perfect unison. There was no why he wanted to imagine either. 5 above, 8 down here, and who knew how many more might be drifting unfinished somewhere between. In revulsion, in the grip of something he felt but could not name, he gave the foremost effigy a shove to send it toppling back, pulling free of the muck and thunking into another behind it. Then a third gave way. a slow chain reaction that disturbed the silt, but the worms not at all. Abruptly, his legs were yanked from beneath him and he was upside down again, moving up and away, something reeling him like a fish. He nearly panicked and lost the breath locked inside until the tug on his ankle made sense. Chemo being chemo again. He couldn't right himself under the tension, never enough slack to turn around. Rather than flail at the end of the rope, he relaxed and let it happen until he broke the surface, spewing bubbles and foam, and breathed with a violent gasp, once more a creature of land and air. Chemo peered down from the boat as if expecting to see him floating motionless. Huh. Must have said another personal best without even realizing. How long? Danny said. Normal. He had to act normal. 7 minutes. 7. Whoa. He would have never guessed. I had to pull the plug, and yet... You're fine. You sound disappointed about that. No, that's good. Chemo shook his head. Never again. Never again. You need to find somebody else to take you off for this, brother. All you do is scare the shit out of me. Poor Chemo. Danny felt genuinely bad for him. Bad for them both. Because it wouldn't have helped one bit to tell Chemo that no, he wasn't fine. He hadn't come up fine at all. Worse, he couldn't tell Gale either. How was he supposed to convey a thing like this? They're you. They're supposed to be you. He couldn't even be sure how she would react. If she'd find it flattering, the best thing since ambergris, or if the balance would tip and this weird synergy between her and the sea would finally leave her spooked. Once she picked up on the obvious, that something was bothering him, his only option was to lie. Had a bad dive, burst a blood vessel in my nose. It happens. All he could do was look ahead, try to get her away for 2 weeks, inject some time and distance to break this encroaching spell, and leave whatever carvings might wash up next for someone else to find. Why don't you come with me to Tahiti, for the Billabong? It's been years. Well, I know, but I should stay. I don't have the kind of work I can take with me. She was hardly doing the work now. It'll still be here when you get back. You might even get some new ideas there to bring home. Like tiki carvings? I went through my tiki phase years ago. Oh, right. She had. He packed and planned and tried his best to make it sound enticing. Seeing the Pacific from another side would do them good. This could be the last time he went there as a competitor. None of it seemed to quite get through. I know. I just like it here. There's something about here. Some people go their whole lives looking for the place they should be. I found mine here. A long time ago. Even before she'd found him. Gail was too kind to say so, but it had to have crossed her mind. He was one more gift the sea had given her. The one thing it was most capable of taking back. That worried her. It had all along. I love you. You've always been my anchor, she would tell him. But it scares me what could happen if the anchor chain ever broke. In that way of sounds, unusual enough to penetrate, familiar enough to not alarm, it wove its way into his dreams before teasing him awake. The dream dissolved at once, so he lay in the dark with the only thing left, the far, reverberant squeal of a whale, rolling in across the water and floating up through the open window. Listen, he whispered, and reached over to give Gail a gentle shake, but her side of the bed was empty, a sure sign she was listening already. She wasn't at the window, wasn't in the kitchen, wasn't in the bathroom or front room. He knew the feel of a house emptied of any other heartbeat than his own. Danny yanked on enough clothing to call himself decent, a t-shirt and shorts that felt backwards, then stumbled outside. But she wasn't on the deck either. The night was as bright as nights got. all moon and no clouds, and the sea a glittering expanse of silver white and blue black. It was the world. It was their entire world. Braced against the redwood deck, he peered down at the beach. After a moment, his fingers gripped the rail with the same steadying ferocity as his toes gripped a surfboard. He felt every bit as much in motion, shooting through a rolling barrel that collapsed behind him. From up here, he was so accustomed to the sight of Neptune's throne that the high-backed platform was as familiar a fixture of the landscape as the ridge on which they lived. But now its shape was different. Wrong. He couldn't see what, exactly, only that some hulking form occupied it, bulbous and enormous, wet enough and slick enough to catch the moonlight with an iridescent gleam. To his left, a form no bigger than a person traversed toward it, small and dark against the pale sands. He heard it again, rebounding from the cliffs, the same high, rolling squall that had brought him awake, the forlorn cry he'd always taken for a passing whale, roaming the endless waters and calling out for what or who might answer. Danny sprinted for the beach stairs, the zigzag flights up which he'd helped lug a lifetime's worth of the sea's gifts, clueless, never imagining what it might have wanted or expected in return. Pounding down the steps, he was as good as blind, the moonlight trapped above the canopy of leaves that crowded up and over. Although he held the rail, heedless of the splinters he'd picked up along the way, he went tumbling before he knew what happened. Something damp and slick sliding beneath his bare foot. His leg torqued one way while the rest of him torqued another. If pain glowed, his knee would have lit the light. No wave had ever flung him more violently than this, than gravity and his own momentum. He juddered down the stairs, sometimes on his hip, sometimes on his rump, every hardwood step another bruise. When he thudded to a stop, he had 2 flights left to go, and scooted the rest of the way on his ass. Down on the beach, he tried to stand, but his knee wasn't having it. He tumbled to the sand, still warm from the day's sun. He crawled, striving to see through the pink haze of pain, first making out the moon-etched lines of the cliffs ahead, and then below them, the suggestion of some lesser mountain that rose up and slouched back toward the sea. Then he crawled until he found a line of dimples in the sand, footprints, unbroken and resolute. He followed them, dragging his useless leg behind him, hearing nothing but the wheeze of his breath and the crash and retreat of the waves. He crawled into the pillars and planks of Neptune's throne loomed above him, empty now, but darkened with water and draped with robes of seaweed, the air around it rich with a heavy musk of brine. The sand before it was churned to wet clumps and crooked furrows, as if between here and the water's edge the beach had been plowed by some dragging thing, bristling with appendages that had tried to walk, but was never meant to move on land. Alongside the disturbance, the line of her steps turned, veering toward the water. He followed these 2, scrambling on both elbows and one good knee, until they were no longer dimples but true footprints, pressed into the wet sand, heel and arch and 5 small toes. He scurried ahead, frantic now, as step by step the prints began to change, the impression left by each toe deepening, as though dug by a hooked and spiny claw, with a growth of webbing in between. He followed them to the foaming lip of the sea, where he lost them, her last footprints, erased, as the water washed across and smoothed the sand blank again. Still, he floundered onward as the waves battered him head-on, stopping only when he was slapped across the face and shoulder by something solid, heavy as a wet blanket, that clung like a cowl. Sputtering, he peeled it away, and when after the longest moments of his life, he accepted what the tattered thing was. He had no idea what to do with it. He couldn't bring himself to pitch it away, couldn't think of any reason to keep holding on. If Gale didn't need her skin anymore, then where on land or sea was it supposed to go? Out past the breakers, beneath the moon, a gleaming, bulbous dome submerged with an elephantine skronk that he felt ripple through the waves and shudder through the sand. Then, he was alone. He knew the feel of a shore emptied of any other heartbeat than his own. He retreated far enough to keep from choking, then rolled onto his back to face the stars, exhausted and sweating from the pain. The water surged in and out for 1,000 cycles, and 1,000 more. In time, he wondered which of the ligaments in his knee were in shreds. ACL, PCL, LCL, MCL. Any and all. He surely had a motherfucker of a hamstring tear as well. Whatever the damage, his career was done, even sooner than expected. By the time Danny was ready to move again, the sky had lightened to a formless gray. Fog had crept in across the waters, and with it, a stinging drizzle of rain. His knee was swollen double, and he couldn't bend his leg, but nothing much hurt by default anymore. There was dawn enough for him to spy a familiar shape stranded in the channels, where the sea met the freshwater stream from the cliffs. He made for it, mocking thing that it was. As complete a carving as he'd seen, even farther along than the one sunk amid the kelp beds. Or maybe this was one of them, finished along the way. He knew its shape, knew the face, the hands folded as if in prayer, but he knew nothing of the depicted changes wrought upon the rest of her, the thin, frilled slits at either side of her throat, the fins along each forearm and lower leg. But he did know, and had all along, that she'd smelled of the sea, and tasted of it too, and that the ocean and its gods recognized their own. Gale must have known as well, somewhere inside. Must have cherished the sea even while living in fear that if she ever went out on it, she might not come back. It would never stop wanting her. He had to admit that this carving, all of them, appeared to have been made with love. But love, as Gale had said, on a whole different wavelength. He rolled the effigy back out into the surf, fighting the wishes of the waves, the most grueling task he'd ever done. But it was still a log at heart. It floated. The first 20 yards from shore were the hardest, the next 100 a little easier. He clung to this new gale until he could no longer push off the sandy bottom, then threw his good leg over and across, straddling it like a surfboard, and paddling out to sea. In time, the roar of the breakers faded behind him, until he was left with the quieter slop and splash of a calmer sea, as the dim sun rose over his shoulders and began to burn the fog away. He paddled as far as he could, until he thought he might have just 5 more good, strong minutes left inside. The ocean yawned deep and dark beneath. He could still breathe, but with one leg, could he kick hard enough to overcome the air in his lungs? Could he reach that threshold that changed everything? He had to believe he could. 40 feet. He only had to make it another 40 feet. 2 days ago, he'd spent 7 minutes under, and it went like nothing. There had to be meaning in that. Superhumans were popping up everywhere, remember? Something in the air, something in the water. A beautiful time to be alive. He rolled off the log and made the plunge. He would find Gale again, or he wouldn't. He too was ready for another way of life, or he wasn't. The ocean would accept him, or it wouldn't. But he could still be a part of it. Either way.